Hello and welcome to a very special video. I am here with a dear friend from Twitter and YouTube, Adam Martin.
Hello everybody.
Who is new to the channel, never been on it before. So I know Adam from Twitter and YouTube. I've seen your channel before. I've watched your podcast, watched most of the episodes. Really good stuff. The one with James Goss, I recommend everyone to check out. That was amazing. I loved that one.
So it's funny, isn't it? Because he's such a great personality as well. But like, I didn't know what to expect, and like some of the stuff he comes out with is just brilliant. I definitely one of my favorites.
I love the bit where he's like, "I got through this whole thing without having to go for a wee."
yeah. That's it though. He just came out with these odd these random little one-liners that are brilliant. So definitely go and check that out if you're a fan of his work.
And it's so funny because I think you brought up like the season 8 boxer coming out maybe or something like that, and he's just like, "Oh yes, and remember how in the Demons the Third Doctor is not a likable person."
Well, he's not. It's that it's that one line, isn't it? What is it? Joe, the Brigadier's under like a lot of pressure, and he is your superior officer. So just show him some respect. It's like, what? Like where has this come from?
Yeah.
So...
And then there's also that bit at the start where he's just like, "You don't know how to use a map."
Yeah, I mean, we all love John Pertwee. A lot of us love the Third Doctor, but you have to admit there are those like odd lines or odd moments where you sort of go like,
Oh yeah, no,
like,
I watched the Time Warrior last night, and he referred to Sarah Jane as the fairest sex. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, that whole I know everyone's like, oh yeah, Sarah Jane, but if you look back, like the first few scenes with her and the Third Doctor, it's not very comfortable. Like, he's basically insinuating the entire time that she should go and get him tea. He wants another Joe Grant, basically, because obviously Jo had her moments, but it's like, what does she say in Terror of the Autons? It's like, oh, you need someone to like pass you your test tubes and tell you how brilliant you are. Or the Brigadier says that or whatever. Yeah. And it's just a bit like, it's that teeth grinding moment, isn't it? You sort of go,
I think the good thing is that basically he learns that he gets like slapped into place by his companions, which is good. It's kind of...
absolutely. Yeah. Well, who knows all about slapping than Clara Oswald, which I'm sure we'll bring up. We'll bring up at some point today.
Well, here we go. Here's another segue into a doctor who starts out very angry about things. But yeah, basically this video stemmed from a brief conversation on Twitter. Basically, what it is we're going to be discussing the Peter Capaldi era of Doctor Who.
That's right.
And the reason why I thought of this would be a good idea is that over the years I have found that, not necessarily that this is a bad thing, but a lot of the time when I talk to people about this era who are big fans of it, that I have disagreements with, they get quite passionate and they get very colourful with their words, and it often doesn't really lead anywhere because it just ends up with lots of shouting. And I was just thinking, I was like, I just want that one person that I can just sit down with and talk about this like sensibly. And it's not like I think that anyone's bad for having passion. Obviously, people have seen me be passionate about things all the time, but I think it's about time that someone just sits down to talk about this era and doesn't like get all heated, because it just always happens with anyone I've seen talk about it.
Yeah, the 12 era stands can be, as you say, very passionate, and I think, as you said, like it affects any era of Doctor Who, But no, I completely agree with you, and hence why I thought this would be a great idea, because I've entered debates or discussions with people about a variety of Doctor Who related things, and like you said, when it gets really like needlessly colourful word wise and all that sort of stuff, you just. The debate's not really there anymore, because then it almost feels like it's just becoming who can shout the loudest sort of thing.
Because I remember you commented on my thing saying you thought you were talking about how you really like Hellbent, and then everyone around us, like sort of in like a sort of almost mob mentality, was just like, oh, what's he gonna do now? Is he gonna destroy Adam? And I'm just like, I don't want to. I don't want to. I'm not.
No. I'm just up for a peaceful debate. Like, you can disagree with me and tear my opinion to shreds, dissect it, and that's cool. Like that's what I'm here for. It always baffles me how things, mainly on social media, like can get as you said, like so nasty so quickly. It's quite shocking, like how people will.
I mean, the last few days has been rough for the social
Oh
media
yeah,
moment.
man, Doctor Who Twitter's been a very rough place to be, and it's obviously some of those things have been related to the show directly, some things not. But just on the whole, it's like I think when people get defensive about something, like for a lot of people, it seems the knee-jerk reaction is to get very like nasty or personal, which I think is the worst thing, because obviously, like, a lot of us, like me and yourself, like, we're all mates to a degree, like on Twitter, and we're in Discord calls and stuff like that. But I think at the end of the day, we, like, a lot of the people who get nasty don't know us that well, if at all. So it's like you're now commenting on me when you don't know a thing about me. So it's just not nice. So
I mean, to not to toot our own horn or anything, but I do feel like it's kind of people like us that are just holding this all together, like stopping it from becoming awful, if you know what I mean. Because I don't want it to. I don't want it to be like that at all. I want it to be, respectful at the very least. Yeah.
No, yeah. I think I said this to someone the other day. I hope going forward we have, as a community, we have like more victories than failures in that department. Because I think you're right. There are like the group of us who I think. Not that we necessarily call out bullshit when we see it, although we do that as well. But you're right, just sort of sometimes we'll see things and maybe leave a comment just saying like, "Hey, let's just remember to keep it peaceful, keep it light," sort of thing. So no, I definitely agree with that, because it should be a fun place. But I want it to be like when I remember when I got into it, like 9-10 years old. Obviously, social media wasn't a thing, and even in the playground, if you disagreed, like people were still nice about it, which is mad in a way. It's like, kids in a playground, the right place where it could all get nasty and whatever, like it was just fine. So it's like, how can kids get it better than a bunch of fully grown adults behind a keyboard?
I do think there's an element of like, when you're in your late teens and your early 20s, it's when you're really like breaking out as a person, and I think people just get a bit too passionate sometimes. Like they need to just cool down. And I think I've noticed that, like when I first started this channel a few years ago, when I was like 19, 20 years old, I was a lot more on edge. I was very easily angered. And these days I think, like, I'm still very critical, but I've kind of adopted the mentality of, when you're criticizing a piece of media, you have to make it about, you are not attacking the person, but you're attacking but you're criticizing the actual writing itself, or the story, or whatever's going on. But like, that's kind of my rule of thumb, is like you've got to have it so that you're not attacking the person that likes it, you're only attacking the actual media itself, and not the person, not make it personal, is the way I've sort of thought about it.
No, I think that's a good way to go about it. I mean, how I've been doing it recently is, like, I remember, like, I loved those first few years when I got into Doctor Who, because for me it was just like a lot of fun. Like as a 9-year-old, there was not objectively a bad episode, because we'd all go into school and talk about it. So when I watch New Who now, I always try first broadcast. I'm like, okay, I'll switch my like critical brain off on the first viewing. I just want to see if I have fun with it on a base level, and then I'll go back and then I'll start analysing it a bit more. And I've loved doing it that way. I've found a lot of fun and love in the show again. So it's I've loved doing it that way.
Yeah, but anyway, I just thought it would be. I just want to sort of, I don't know what the real goal behind this is, but I just sort of, firstly, I was actually genuinely interested to hear what you had to say, but also I just want to sort of, if possible, in a way, I suppose you could say, lead by example, in the sense of like, this is kind of how I feel would be a really healthy way to talk about things that you disagree with each other with, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's going to be good.
Yeah, okay. So, with that said, shall we get into it?
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
Right, so, the Peter Capaldi years, Series 8, 9, and 10, 2014 to 2017, run by Stephen Moffat, the famous man that everyone...
I love how you pause there. The famous man.
Everyone has something to say about Stephen Moffat. He is, I would say, out of every person in the entire world, he is the least the least boring human being ever to exist.
Oh, for sure.
Because there's always something to say about him.
Yeah, there's always he's either the ultimate savior of Doctor Who, or he is the devil incarnate.
Yes,
like every showrunner.
Yeah, yeah, but him more than any other. And not only does you always have something to say about him, he's always got something to say about you as well.
Yeah.
Which is very amusing.
I love a man who fires back. So yeah.
But yeah, I think that, like, I just want to get out of the way. I think that he's a wonderful man. I think the lead cast, like Peter Capaldi, Jenna Coleman, Pearl Mackie, and Matt, as far as I'm aware, Matt Lucas, they all seem like really interesting people that have a lot of talent. I respect a lot of their work. So I suppose I'll give a sort of brief outline of my thoughts on the Capaldi era, and then I'll let you have a little brief thing, and then we'll just dive right in. So,
cool, man, yeah.
So I would say this is a tough one for me to really pin down, because I have quite complex feelings on it. It's not like if you were to ask me what my thoughts are on, say, the Matt Smith era or the Jodie Whittaker era, I could probably sum it up pretty simply, because there's an overall just disinterest from me. Not that I hate them or anything. I don't hate any era of Doctor Who. It's my favorite show after all, but I can sort of give a blanket statement of this isn't for me. Whereas with the Peter Capaldi era, it's this very strange anomaly, because on paper and in concept, it sounds like perfection. Like, it sounds exactly like what I would want this show to be. It's got, like, if you look at Series 8, you've got a dark, brooding, sardonic Doctor, played by one of the best actors ever, and his relationship with his companion is very, it's tested by how different they are from each other and how their personalities clash but also complement. Then you've got the fact that it's all about not only what it means to die, but what it means to murder. Like, that is brilliant for a sci-fi show, to have all of that veiled over everything that the show already was. Sounds like heaven to me. Then you've got something like Series 9, which is again, it's all about, like, this big web of time, like, prophecy thing, which is, it's all integrated into the show's lore, and you've got some of the best, like, direction, some of the best, like, acting. It's very art house Series 9, I would say, that, like, on the surface level, like, especially with episodes like Heaven Sent. It's just such it feels like an independent film done in Doctor Who, and it's very because now the Doctor has softened. You have this, like, complex back and forth between this brooding individual that you saw in his first season, mixed in with this very tender, broken man who's, lost one of the people he loves the most, and all of that, and all that drama. And that, again, on paper sounds exactly like what I want. And then you got Series 10, which is just really, 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 really fun. Like, it's just...
Yeah.
And to be fair, I do actually quite like Series 10, so kudos on that front. They did, for the most part. I do have a few things to say. I don't think it's perfect, but on the whole, I was more positive than negative on Series 10, so I can give a little thumbs up for that. So, but what I'm trying to say as a whole is that, in concept, the Capaldi era sounds like it should be my favourite ever. But my issue is, I feel like some of the execution doesn't work for me, and that's where it falters. That's where it's not that I think this era is wholly bad. It's just, it's very upsetting for me, because it's something that I feel like should be something I love, but it isn't, and that kind of hurts. That kind of hurts for me, because it's like, wow, this could have been, what I described. This could have been exactly what I was looking for, and it wasn't. And then there's also, in some very individual cases, like, we'll get to some specific episodes, there are points where it hits a pretty low for me. Like, there are a couple of episodes in the Capaldi era that are some of my least favorites ever, and there are lots of reasons for that. But it's just yeah. To put it as a whole, it's just really disappointing for me. Specifically, series 8 and 9, I desperately want to love them because they sound awesome, but I just can't get into it for various reasons. And that's kind of my thoughts on the whole. But apart from that, like the acting, a lot of the acting's great from like Peter Capaldi and Jenna Coleman and all that. And a lot of the direction is some of the best in the show. Same with Murray Gold's music, some of the best in the show. And there are gems. There are gems throughout the era that I love, but it's not as tight as I would have wanted, and it's certainly an era that I don't go back to rewatch very often, which is a shame.
Okay.
Which is a shame because Peter Capaldi is one of my favorite actors I've ever seen. So
yeah,
it's a tough one, but
okay.
that's kind of my thoughts. So how about you? Have a go.
Yeah. Ooh, I mean that's quite an opening gamut there. I mean, the Peter Capaldi era in summary, I just think I think over those 3 years, it offers everything that Doctor Who can sort of has been and can represent. Like you said, Series 8 is this really dark, morose, very brutal season, if that's the right word, in many respects. It's testing for us as the audience as well as the characters, which I always enjoy when a drama show in particular tests me as an audience member. It takes me out of my comfort zone. Series 9 follows it up by some really interesting concepts and big ideas. Didn't do all of them work? No, but especially at the time and even now on rewatch, I still enjoy a lot of these ideas, which is mainly carried off by the lead cast and the supporting characters in different episodes. And then Series 10, I'd agree with you. It's just like it's this bundle of fun. And I'll say this now, which might upset some Matt Smith fans, but Series 10 is like a better version of Series 7 as a whole. Like,
I mean,
do you know what I mean?
To be honest, though, I think there are quite a few Smith fans that aren't the biggest on Series 7. Like a lot of Smith fans that I know love Series 5 and Series 6, and to an extent 7A. But like Series 7B especially, they tend to switch off. Apart from Theories.
We love your Theories, but yeah, we know you love your themes in Series 7B. But I just think, like, I remember Series 7 as a whole. Remember it was bundled as like, every episode's going to be like this blockbuster film. It's going to be lots of fun. And there were some fun moments in there, but I just remember finding it sort of like you said about 8 and 9, just very disappointing on that front. Whereas Series 10 didn't necessarily go for that angle, but it felt more like that angle to me.
Yeah.
And it pulled it off a lot better. Like loads of these great standalone adventures with the Doctor and his friend Bill going about time and space, getting up to who knows what. That's what Series 10 felt like for me. And I was like, this is what Series 7 should have been. So I do like the contrast over the whole era, how you go from something really dark and morose and it gradually gets lighter. I know I'm not the first to say it, but I like how in the Capaldi era you get this really, in my view, this really like nice tight narrative of the Doctor himself, like purely just the Doctor character going from this really dark and low place to a place that's lighter. And obviously he has bumps along the way. Obviously by the time in his last story, he's ready to throw in the towel completely, and he's essentially willing for death. But yeah, the 12th Doctor's story I always see as one of sort of self-redemption and sort of self-acceptance as well. And I think for me, especially the time of life I was in when it was first transmitting, that's why it holds a lot of importance. Because when Series 8 started, I literally had just started university, which, as I'm sure yourself or anyone who's been will know, is it's the biggest shake-up of your life at that point. You're moving away, and it's your sort of first taste of adulthood. And I think Doctor Who perfectly coincided with that at that time, if that makes sense. Like it felt like the show was going through its biggest shift up in the modern era at that point, and I think that's why it helped me connect with it initially so much. But I guess to close on the brief thing, it's it's a wonderful era filled with lots of twists and turns that I can get on board with. It's got everything I could want from Doctor Who at various points. It's got fun. It's got moments of tension, emotion, genuine, like moments where I've had a genuine emotional reaction to it. It's just, if you told me to like pick an era and say what is Doctor Who, I'd point at the Peter Capaldi era and go this. That's my brief on it.
Okay. Right. So I'm just thinking where to go from there. I suppose if I think a good indicator for me, so I know where we can take this, is to just quickly go through each episode and just in one word, just like give a 1-word review of each, so like good or bad or whatever, or however you feel. Yeah. Just so I know what to dig into.
Sure. So, deep breath. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Best intro story for me. Into the Dalek. I'm trying to think of. I don't just want to say good or bad. I'm trying to think of cool words, but I'm just gonna say, yeah, fantastic. Robot of Sherwood, fun. Listen, magical. Love Listen. Time Heist. Kooky. Kooky's the word I'd pick for that, but yeah, good.
Kooky. I don't hear that too often.
Kooky, yeah. The Caretaker. I like it. I want to be careful with my words on that one because of obvious reasons.
Yeah,
but I'm sure we'll come to that. But I like elements of it. Yeah. Kill the Moon. Underrated. I can tell I've already annoyed some people saying that. Mummy on the Orient Express, sublime, yeah, fantastic. Flatline, great. In the Forest of the Night, underappreciated.
Ooh.
I know that's controversial, yeah. Dark Water, love it, absolutely love it. Death in Heaven, great. I'm sure we'll get onto the Series 8 finale, but I just love it. Last Christmas, interesting. Not in a bad way necessarily, but yeah, interesting. Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar, awesome. Before Under the Lake and Before the Flood, yeah, good. It's good. Girl Who Died, the Woman Who Lived, yeah, like it. Just try and remember all the titles now. The Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion, awesome. Love some unit stuff. Sleep No More, bit of a misfire. Face the Raven, yeah, great setup. Heaven Sent, incredible. Hellbent, equally as incredible. Wedding of River Song.
Husband.
Sorry, go on.
Husband's
Sorry,
River Song.
not Wedding. Yeah, Wedding of River Song is a completely different story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Husbands of River Song. Again, yeah, fun. Return of Doctor Mysterio. Surprised. That one surprised me. The Pilot, great restart. Smile is good. Thin Ice, excellent. Knock Knock is fun. Oxygen is... I was about to swear then, but it's effing great.
You can swear if you want to, it's up to you.
Oh, awesome. It's fucking great, man. Extremis or Extremis, however anyone wants to pronounce it, is middling. The Pyramid at the End of the World, great. Lie of the Land, Empress of Mars, yeah, cool idea. The Eaters of Light, like it. World Enough and Time, insanely good. The Doctor Falls, also insanely good. And Twice Upon a Time is perfect. Yeah, there you go.
Wow. That was
yeah
almost all positive.
Yeah, I think it's important to say to anyone who thinks, oh, you've just brought on a 12 stand. Like, there are some, as I said there are some episodes that I think aren't necessarily good or the best. So, do you know what I mean? I think it's a common misconception when you say, it's my favourite era.
If I did that with the Russell era, I'd be the fucking same. You know?
But you know what I mean, though? When you say, like, oh, this is my favourite era, I love it so much, people instantly assume you love every single bit of it, when it's like, well, no, actually. There are moments.
Because, like, when you were saying, like, talking about Kill the Moon in the Forest of Night and all that, and I was just like, oh, that's going to piss people off. But I was thinking also, if we were doing, like, the Tennant era, I'd be the same. I'd be like, oh, yeah, Love and Monsters is underrated. Fear is not that bad.
Yeah,
I'd be like, yes, I need to defend all of my troops.
Yeah, man, defend it all. Well, I'm hopefully going to put up a decent defense as we go, but yeah.
All right, my turn.
Go.
Oh god, I'm gonna have to try and top all of your words. I'm all right with word salad. I can try. Deep breath.
Go for it.
Deep breath. Ooh, deep breath. What's the word I'm gonna use for deep breath? It's interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I think interesting's the word. Yeah, interesting. It's there's conflict for me, but there's also more good than there is bad. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Into the Dalek. Enjoyable, good. Like it's good.
Yeah.
Again, there's things that I'm a little like. I'm just thinking of. There's things I think about and I'm not sure about. But there's nothing outright bad for me. It's just a good episode. I like it. I watched it recently, actually. Yeah. It's got some great comedy. Robot of Sherwood. A lot of fun. Listen. This is hard, because when I first watched it, I was the same as you. But on my most recent viewing, I really didn't like it. So I think the word I would use is... I don't want to hurt your feelings or anything.
No, you go for it.
The word I would use is pretentious.
Oh, that just instantly made me think of Stephen Moffat, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
No, that's fair.
Yeah, and if I was going to use another word, it might be forced, but I think pretentious is probably more accurate. Time Heist. I don't even know what to say. I've watched it 3 times. I can't even remember what happens apart from when there's a bank, there's a weird thing with eyes sticking out, and then there's the doctor bashes a gong. That's all I remember.
That's pretty much all you need. So yeah.
Yeah. The Caretaker. It's, I don't know. It's kind of funny, I suppose, but then it's also. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to the Caretaker.
Yeah.
Kill the Moon. What's the right word to use here? I suppose problematic is the word I would use.
Sure.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Mummy on the Orient Express. Fantastic. Flatline. Creative. I think that's a good word. Creative. Very creative. In the Forest of the Night. Childish. It has.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of children in the episode.
It has Peppa Pig in it.
It does.
Dark Water. Like Deep Breath, I'm going to say interesting. Death in Heaven. I feel like Death in Heaven deserves like a big Shakespearean kind of word. Death in Heaven is frustrating.
Okay.
Yes, frustrating.
Yeah.
Last Christmas. It's frustrating as well, but I don't care for it as much because it's a Christmas special, whereas Death in Heaven's a finale.
Yeah.
But it's like a more like relaxed frustrating, if that's possible.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. Like Death in Heaven is like Friday frustrating, whereas Last Christmas is like Sunday frustrating. I don't know what the best word is for it.
Yeah.
Magician's Apprentice / Witch's Familiar. It's swerving. There we go, swerving.
Ooh, swerving. Okay.
Yeah. Under the Lake Before the Flood, classic. Very much in the vein of classic here, actually. The Girl Who Died. Insane? Insane.
In good word, yeah.
Insane. The Woman Who Lived. Forgettable.
Okay.
The Zygon invasion / inversion. Just I think a bit. You know how I said Kill the Moon was problematic?
Yeah.
So Kill the Moon is Friday problematic. Zygon two-parter is Sunday problematic.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So still like frustrating or like problematic to a degree, but not as much.
It's a different kind of problematic in the sense that it's not. It's hard to explain. I suppose we'll get into it.
Yeah.
Sleep No More, nauseating.
Ooh.
Face the Raven, fantastic, captivating, phenomenal, compelling. All of those, all of the like emotional words. Heaven Sent, just to piss off Will Maddox, masterpiece.
Hell yeah, that was. I was thinking, I was like, what's that word that's everyone's memeing on? I just couldn't think of it, but yeah, masterpiece.
Yeah. Hell Bent. Hell. I think that's a good word to use.
Well, I can't wait to delve into that. So.
Yeah, that's no man's land for me. Husbands of River Song, surprising. Surprising. Return of Doctor Mysterio, misjudged.
Okay.
The pilot, fun. Yeah, fun, I think. Smile, fun. Thin Ice, fun. Knock Knock, fun and scary.
There's a theme here.
Yes. Oxygen, fun and scary and excellent. Extremis, fun, scary, excellent, and clever. Pyramid at the End of the World, interesting. Lie of the Land, disappointing. Empress of Mars, chill. Eaters of Light,
Yeah.
like a less enjoyable chill. World Enough in Time, not perfect, but pretty awesome. The Doctor Falls. The Doctor Falls. Oh no, I can't even think of one word for this. This is it's like the Doctor Falls is like a lot of the words I've already used all in one. Like positive and negative. I'd say I do on the whole really like it.
Yeah.
But I have a few things. And then Twice Upon a Time is my themes.
My theme.
Yeah, that's all I can because I did a podcast about Twice Upon a Time. Joe Brennan's did a video on it, and that was the thing that he kept on saying. What was it? My hair, my actors, and my themes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. When you put it like, I mean, it's technically not wrong. Like, I don't.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I suppose we should start at the beginning, really, with Series 8. We'll start with the 12th Doctor in Series 8.
Okay.
I think he's very entertaining. I think the comedy is really good. Like, the sardonic humor is probably one of my favorite parts about Series 8. I love the line in Into the Dalek when that guy is killed by the spheres, and they ask where he is, and he's and they're inside like the stomach, and he says, "Top lane if you want to say your condolences." Like that.
Yeah.
Series 8 has a lot of like edgy bollocks like that I think it's really funny. It's kind of it's kind of injecting some of that Malcolm Tucker-esque humor into the Doctor, but a little bit less out of control.
Yeah.
So I love the comedy. I love the performance. Obviously, I think this goes for pretty much every series with Capaldi. I love the performance, and I think where for me the issues start to begin, and it's not necessarily that they are issues that really bug me. but there are just things that I'm not sure on. I can't quite put it together, and I think the best place to start, where I start to feel it falls apart for me, is the "Am I a Good Man" arc, and how that relates to soldiers.
Right.
And so, the part where I can see where it's coming from is, obviously, the Doctor was in the Time War, has very strong views on soldiers. Like, if you watch the Sontaran Stratagem two-parter and the Doctor's Daughter, you'll see, the 10th Doctor at that point in time is very contentious to soldiers, very anti-guns, blah, blah, blah. However, the thing with this, for me, is it's a little bit jarring. And this is going to be a common theme with Series 8, because it comes right after Series 7, and in a lot of ways, it has to carry over things from Series 7 to justify narrative. This is going to be a big thing with Clara, but we'll get to her. But with the Doctor, we've just seen him in the 50th anniversary save all their lives and bring the planet back. And then he goes into suddenly asking her, "Am I a good man?" And also being very... I don't know, it just felt weird to me that he was anti-soldier, despite the fact that this war has sort of been resolved. And I get why they're doing it, because obviously Danny Pink is a soldier, and it's going along, one of the themes of Series 8, which is about, what it means to murder. And it's sort of putting in the perspective of, well, what if the Doctor went back to what he was like in the Time War and all that? That's kind of where they're headed with Series 8's Doctor, I feel. And that's kind of why they set up this, him questioning his own morality, and also him being not a big fan of soldiers before he even meets Danny, so they can have that clash. But I just find it a bit out of left field. I can't quite place why, but it feels a bit forced to me. Like, this arc doesn't feel like it really has a setup. It just feels like Moffat decided that this is what he wanted, and so he kind of just did it, and he just kind of had that scene in Into the Dalek. And I don't know. I don't know how to feel. I don't know if I can take that with the amount of seriousness that it wants, because it just feels so out of nowhere, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because obviously we do get the scenes like in Deep Breath, like the bit where he ditches Clara for a bit, and you're questioning, well, why did he do that? She's going to suffocate, blah blah blah. And there's also the scene at the end where it's up to interpretation whether or not he pushed the clockwork droid off the ship. Yeah. And then obviously he looks right in the camera, does the angry eyebrows. So it's obviously setting up like moral complexity for him, but I'm not sure about it. I just don't... I can't wrap my head around why, but I just don't... It's really hard for me to buy it, because I don't feel like this has actually come from anywhere other than it's a new Doctor, and Moffat decided this is what he wanted to do with him, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, it's interesting hearing that take, 'cause again, it's one I've not heard before. But I do think there's a small degree of that going on, like you're saying, like sort of a Moffat pushing, if you like, if that's the term we're going to invent. But I really like that whole "Am I a good man" thing, because to me the question of it for me it felt sort of new, because of course the Doctor is, if you're just looking at in terms of like a sci-fi drama, he is the hero of the show. Do you know what I mean? That is like seemingly that is the one unshakable thing. Like, he has bumps along the road, but ultimately you're like, well, he is, of course he's good, because he's the hero, he's going to save the day. And when I first heard the whole "Am I a good man" thing, I think I was sort of like, oh, like, we've never really stopped to question this before as like an audience, or not in this manner anyway. And I kind of like how this Doctor, when he starts in Deep Breath, when you look at Tennant and you look at Smith, when Tennant wakes up, if you like, but Smith right from the get-go, they're thrown into very active situations where they choose to be the hero very quickly. Do you know what I mean? Like, 10 immediately chooses to fight the Sycorax, 11 immediately sorts out the Atraxi, whereas, as you say, like 12 has that little bit of time where he he sort of goes off, he does his own thing. And one of my favourite scenes in Deep Breath is the scene with the homeless guy, where he gets the coat from.
Yes, that's Sarah Jane's husband, well, Elizabeth Sladen's husband, right? Widower?
Yeah, Brian Miller, I think it is, yeah. And I love that scene because I think it's one of the best examples. Because, regeneration as a concept's always been shown to us as it's meant to be this, really traumatic thing, or it has the potential to be very traumatic and, have major consequences, I think that scene, in my view, really neatly sums up the effects that regeneration can have on a Time Lord, like for the worse. Because you've taken a guy who, by his own admission, is over 2,000 years old, and you'd think, well, after 11 regenerations or whatever, you'd think he'd know on a moral basis where he stands. But this doctor doesn't at first. He's saying, give me a coat, give me a coat. He's not being kind about it, like maybe Matt Smith would. He's demanding it. He's being rude. He's being all these things, and I don't know. That was one of the first indications where I thought, I like where this is going, in the sense of you're giving me a doctor who I can't predict all their actions straight away. Because whilst David Tennant and Matt Smith as actors, I love their performances, I felt, for me at least, their doctors and their actions for the vast majority of their 10 years to me were very predictable. Whereas Capaldi, I felt like I was constantly being pushed on my toes with what he was going to do. And Into the Dalek pushes that further, like you said, when the several characters get killed and he almost doesn't bat an eyelid about it, in the same way maybe, David Tennant would probably have a big speech with his big grinning teeth. That's not a dig, but you know what I mean? It's he'd be more upset by that.
I can picture it.
Whereas yeah, you can see it's like, no, he didn't have to die, or something like that.
I love that. Well, I'm just flashing back to Doomsday when he says, "No wonder you scream."
Yeah, right, in the Dalek, and the fish up bowl thing, just making his face really distorted, and it's just a bit funny. But yeah, I think that's what I really appreciate, though, about Deep Breath and the "Am I a good man" concept. It's like we can ask that in our own time, but the fact that Doctor's asking that of himself, I really appreciate as a concept. I think it's not perfect, as you said. Like along the way, there's little moments of Moffat bumping, and the whole thing with soldiers. Again, I've never really had an issue with it, because I think peppered throughout Doctor Who's history, not as strongly as this, but like there's several moments with both classic Doctors and new Doctors, like you said yourself with Tennant, where the Doctor clearly isn't the biggest fan of any military. Like, yes, he's worked with UNIT and stuff, but there's several scenes in the Third Doctor's era where he's either clashing with the Brigadier or he's slamming him down for, his suggestions or his ideas of like, oh, we should blow up the place. And do you know what I mean? It's like he's and I think we forget with the Third Doctor, he's not, for the first few years, he's not there by choice either. Like, he's with them because he knows them. It's a base he can set up. But I've always felt the Third Doctor's never been particularly happy being with the military. Not necessarily the Brigadier as a character, but the military as a whole. I think he sort of resents being tied to a military organisation. Yeah, I think
I've always gotten the feeling it's like he's close with Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, but he doesn't like what he represents in his work. If you get what I'm saying. Yes. Because when he first met him in the Web of Fear, UNIT wasn't a thing, and he was obviously part of the army, but it was more grounded, more personal, and whereas once he was exiled and he actually had to work with him, he discovered a lot more about the military and on Earth, and I think it very much it clashed a lot. Yeah, absolutely, and again, like through various Doctors, there's small moments like that. Even if it's one line where whatever the military presence is, he's clearly not for it. And I think you're right. Obviously, with the Time War, where he sort of became that with John Hurt's War Doc, he sort of became that representation because he felt he had to. And then leading into Day of the Doctor when he saves Gallifrey. But I think it's also to do with how he feels other people perceive him in a military sense, because he was sort of, in saving Gallifrey, he sort of became, this grand coordinator to saving Gallifrey. Do you know what I mean? He was like, the commander-in-chief, the master planner, telling everyone what to do. And
there's moments throughout this series, I think mainly in The Caretaker, you know, where Danny sort of mocks the Doctor by addressing him as Sir or Commanding Officer or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And from Capaldi's performance, you can see he's really not comfortable with this, and it riles him up even further.
That's probably my favourite Danny Pink scene, to be honest.
Where he sort of pretends to call him Sir and all that.
Yeah, we'll get to what I think about Danny Pink as a whole, but that's probably my favourite scene from him. It's actually quite good.
Yeah, because it's this... I think for me at least, that scene just shows sort of this dichotomy about the whole soldiers thing. I think it's not just simply the Doctor doesn't like soldiers for what they represent that's been building up for his 2,000-year life, but also how he is viewed as this commanding general by so many people. You know, even again, we'll get to it, but, you know, even Missy in the finale, she's like, I'm giving you an army. He resents that.
Yeah.
You know, it's the exact antithesis of what he wants in this life. So I think part of the whole I don't like soldiers thing is him sort of reacting to try and get people to stop thinking of him as like a general, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's how I've sort of always perceived it anyway. It's not a perfect notion, I granted, like, you know, I think it's very sharp to the degree where I completely understand what you said and it feels very left field. Like, you know, maybe if it had built up maybe over Capaldi's over the first season or the 3 years as a whole, it might have come across better. But I do agree, it can come across as very, this has come out of nowhere, and it's like, whoa, what? But yeah.
I think I would be able to buy it better if Day of the Doctor hadn't brought back Gallifrey. If Day of the Doctor had gone the route of the Doctor coming to terms with what he did and explaining to his companion at the time, Clara, why he can't bring it back ever, I feel like that would have worked so much better for me, and I think this arc would naturally stem off that. Like, I think that experience there, if that had happened, would feel more like it's a follow-up, whereas this feels more like an idea at scratch level.
Okay.
And it doesn't feel like a continuation of what I've just seen. And that's where I get a little confused, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I get you. I mean, I think I still say I enjoy the premise, the whole "Am I a good man?" and the soldiers thing as a whole. Like, I like the concept for this Doctor, and yeah, it's not, as we've said, it's not necessarily perfect, but I just love the moment in the TARDIS. I think it's right at the start of Into the Dalek where, you know, well, he asks it, you know, Clara, you know, tell me, am I a good man? And she says, I don't know. Because I think at that point, especially on transmission, I remember we didn't really know either. Because like I said, he'd had that moment in Deep Breath where, you know, did he push the clockwork droid or didn't he? But I love that sort of anticipation in a way, even though in the back of my mind it's like, well, of course he is, because, you know, it's Stephen Moffat writing Doctor Who, so of course he's going to be a good man to a degree. But I loved having this brief period of time where I didn't know anymore, if that makes sense. It's just it provided a so much more interesting dichotomy for me as an audience member. It feels like a much better realization of what they were trying to do with the Sixth Doctor back in the day. You know, that whole regeneration is traumatic and he does these questionable things, but of course back then you could argue after the Twin Dilemma they didn't really follow up on that.
The thing is that the Twin Dilemma, I haven't seen the episode, but I've seen the TARDIS scenes.
Everyone talks about, yeah.
And so based on what I know about the episode, it's very ham-fisted. It's not like delicate, it's very ham-fisted. And then in season 22, it's played for entertainment, it's not played for drama most of the time. Yeah, no, that's a pretty good summation. Like, I get a lot of I find the Twin Dilemma quite fun, but yeah, that description of it being played for entertainment the next season is absolutely right. Absolutely. It's like you watch the first half of Attack of the Cybermen, and it's hilarious.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. I just think they had, with the Sixth Doctor, it was a case of they had this interesting idea that they wanted to do, but then they didn't really do it. Whereas I feel with 12, they sort of had a similar thing of this is what we want to do. We want to make him very questionable and different. And then they actually did it, or for me at least, they did it in a way that I could get on board with as an audience member that didn't make me want to switch off.
Well, I think with the Sixth Doctor is they wanted to follow up on what they'd already done in the JNT era before, because obviously in season 18 they completely shifted the Fourth Doctor into his final phase, and he became a much more serious character. Even though Tom wasn't into it, but to be honest, I do think that's kind of an accidental bit of genius, because it means that he looks like he wants to die, and that's exactly what you need for that season. But J&T very clearly wanted the Doctor to be a much more dramatic character, less of that fun adventurer, and so he does that with Tom in his final seasons. The more like the all around like entropy and world weariness and seeing death before it happens. And then of course the Fifth Doctor is written again like not that he's a serious person, but the way he's written is intended to be a serious character, if you get what I'm saying. Not like, because obviously the Fifth Doctor, in his first season is like, until Eirich, is like a fresh daisy, like he's quite a bouncy person, but it's written for drama rather than for entertainment. And I think with Colin, in concept, they wanted to do again something similar to where, on the opposite side, rather than being like the Fifth Doctor being affable, vulnerable, and having the world, having the universe against him and all that, with the Sixth Doctor they wanted to have someone that was very arrogant, very loose cannon, and very rude, and then eventually he would sort of realize his errors. But the scripts decided to make it more for entertainment, a bit like what they did in like later into Tom's run before season 18, where they made it more about the Doctor is fun to watch rather than the Doctor is a serious character drama person. And I think that's why it happened with Colin. Whereas, like you say, circling back to what we were saying before, with Capaldi's Doctor, Moffat was taking an idea that's similar to Colin, but he wanted to execute it more as serious drama. With, obviously, there's a couple of exceptions like Roberta Sherwood and The Caretaker, where they go the more comedic route, and there's obviously jokes in between, like we've said. But on the whole, he wanted to take it a lot more seriously, so I can see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, no, I just think like that's one thing I always think, like the 12th Doctor's sort of introduction and initial character development is what you sort of long for the Sixth Doctor, because that's what it makes me think of. But yeah, I just think it's done so much better with Capaldi. So yeah, whilst I guess to round off on that, am I a good man, and the soldiers thing, like whilst I agree it's not perfect, like as you said, there are moments where it is pushed. Like there's just to one moment in particular in Death in Heaven, I think it is, when he's aboard the plane and he starts going off at the one he calls Man Scout, like the very first like comment feels justified, but then he just goes on and it just feels a bit more like bullying. So that's one instance of the whole soldiers thing I don't necessarily agree with, but the overall concept, no, I'm still behind it. And just to tie off on what we said about the Brigadier, he even has that line, when he sees the portrait on the plane. I can't remember the exact line, but he says something like, bringing Daddy with you then. But he says it not with a necessary degree of like affection. It's almost like, a tinge of bitterness about it. It's like, I don't know how, I thought about it over the years. Like at first I thought, is that the Doctor's sort of bitterness that, that Kate, the Brigadier's daughter, sort of followed her father down a military path, the path of a soldier, so to speak, or is it? But I mean, I think it's one of those lines where it's sort of open-ended. You can interpret
I think
how you want. But I
think it just stems off again what I was saying about the Doctor's complex relationship with the Brigadier, in the sense that he, in his heart of hearts, he loves Alistair, the man, but he's not a fan of his work as a soldier. That's where they clash. But then, obviously, when you get, like, something like Mordrin Undead when he's retired, there's none of that there, and they're very close. Yeah. If you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good summation of it, really, isn't it? He loves the man out of the uniform.
That does bring me on to a point, actually. I suppose I wasn't initially thinking about talking about this, but I think I'll briefly catch on to it. I'm not the biggest fan of Kate Stewart as a character. It's not that I hate her or anything. I don't have anything against her, but I struggle to sort of get what she is beyond just being the Brigadier's daughter.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you for a lot of that. Like, I feel because I know she was introduced in the 90s in Downtime and stuff, which I haven't seen, but in terms of the main television show, I feel her character is one of those cases where it's a great idea, and there are many things you could do with that, but they just never really did. As you say, outside of her being the Brigadier's daughter and sort of the new head of unit. Nothing against Gemma Redgrave. I think she's a fine actress, but I just think from a writing standpoint, I don't know whether it was a case of did they think, oh, if we make more. At first, I thought, well, if we make more callbacks, will that alienate people? But they make callbacks all the time. I mean, Series 9, she does the whole 5 rounds rapid thing.
Well, it's almost like she just it's almost like Stephen Moffat. The way he writes it is just sort of, if I had the Brigadier in this story, what would I have him do? And then he just slightly alters it so it's, a slightly different, like a little bit more. I don't want to use the word feminine because I don't think that's correct, but I think it's he just takes ideas he would have had if he had put the Brigadier in the story and then slightly alters it for her. That's kind of the feeling I get.
Yeah, and I feel that especially in series, and another in Series 9 as well, but mainly in Series 8, she almost feels like she, in many respects, is too, in moments, like, in awe of the Doctor. I mean, as we all would be, but... And she has those moments where she rebels against him, but it seems all the Doctor has to say is, oh, what would your father say? And then she's, like, changed her mind or whatever. And it's just, or she's stuck with it. It just feels like they reuse the same tropes with her character, and it doesn't allow her much chance to do anything else or do anything that would...
Yeah,
like, why can't she do something different to how her father would do it? That'd be more interesting.
Yeah, of course.
So.
And I cycling back to something that I'm probably going to end up saying quite a lot when it comes to Series 8 is the fact that she was introduced in Series 7 in Power 3, and then she comes back for the 50th anniversary. And, like, Matt Smith's Doctor, I've said this before a lot of times, based on seeing so many different people's lists of Doctors and all that, and just assessing the characters and how they contrast, I feel like there aren't two more different Doctors than Pertwee and Smith, and it's very strange for me to see Matt Smith in a unit story. It doesn't feel right to me. He feels almost the complete opposite of what Unit should be. It's the same thing with even though Unit's not in it, the Hungry Earth two-parter from Series 5, it feels like chalk and cheese to have Fairy Tale and Silurians in the same story. Yeah.
No, I agree. It is. There is that antithesis, I think, in a lot of the Matt Smith era, in that I think Moffat, in many instances, wants to spearhead the fairy tale angle, which is fine, and you can have contrast, but like you said, I just think there's many moments where the contrast doesn't really justify itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to say is that she was introduced in Series 7, and then going into Capaldi's era, you'd think, well, this is the part where they're going to do more with her, like more interesting things with her, but then she just sort of, she's relatively the same for every story, I feel. She doesn't really, I suppose maybe at the climax of the Zygon inversion she does fire up a bit, but apart from that, she's very stagnant for me.
No, or at least that's one point where we'll agree. I think, the character doesn't really get a chance to develop. But again, I think that's more with the writers either not knowing what to do with her or feeling that what they were doing was development when it really wasn't. I think Gemma Redgrave makes the best she can with what she's given. Just as for those watching who don't know, I'm an actor myself when I'm not making content for YouTube, and like reading some of the scripts of like Series 8 and 9, if I was in her shoes, like she's really not given that much to work with, really, when you look at the lines and stuff.
Everything's very wooden,
Yeah, exactly. But just on that point of like the 12th Doctor, I think is almost a perfect antithesis for Unit, where like a contrast where it works. Because he's a Doctor where I believe he could walk into like a Unit briefing room and absolutely tear them up for what they stand for, despite his past history with them. You know, he won't stand for it. Whereas with Matt Smith, if he did that, I probably couldn't quite believe it.
Same.
And it's a problem I had with Matt Smith's character as a whole. Again, not against the performer. I just think the way in which his character was conceived and developed, because there were many moments in his era where, especially with some of the big speeches, I felt like I couldn't necessarily believe him, or I wasn't with him 100%. Absolutely. Whereas with Capaldi, I don't think there's a single speech where I wasn't on board with him 100%. And that's not just me saying that as a Capaldi fan. I mean it as because not only as a character does he feel like he's earned those moments, but from an acting standpoint, not saying Matt Smith can't act, but Capaldi is a phenomenal actor, as we've said.
Yeah.
And he gets across that sort of the age and the weariness of the Doctor. And a lot of people say, oh yeah, but Matt Smith's like an old man trapped in a young man's body. And he is in many respects, but there are many moments where I don't believe it's sold to me.
Yes,
that concept.
I actually agree with you on a lot of things with Smith. Like, the thing with Smith is that there are moments where he's written it perfectly for what his acting style is and what his character should be. But I find what Moffat wants the 11th Doctor to be often will clash with what the actor wants the character to be. Like, I think I've said before, one of the things with Series 5 that I feel a bit disconnected with, and obviously this is a very popular series, so I am treading on sacred ground a bit, but it feels to me like Moffat wants the 11th Doctor to obviously be this like fairy tale wizard character, but also to be this big bombastic hero the same way Tennant was. But the way that Matt Smith plays him, Matt Smith is looking at Patrick Troughton and Tomb of the Cybermen and thinking, no, I want to be like that. I want to be a little shy, awkward, but sort of mischievous person. I want to be, very understated and very quiet. And he does that really well, but the problem is that what he's written into is not the same thing. And so for me, there's just this weird clash. And then once you get to Series 6 onwards, he changes his performance to suit the way Moffat writes him. But the way he performs it doesn't suit his strengths as an actor. So you think about stuff like A Good Man Goes to War, where he gets really fired up. But I just find it weird. It doesn't. It just doesn't sit right with me. It's very strange.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think that's where on Capaldi, like, it all just seems to blend together. The way he's being written for and the way Capaldi's choosing to play him, I think, marry up perfectly.
Yes.
Like, hence why, especially with Series 8, people are like, oh, he's too angry. It's like, well, why wouldn't he be angry? Like, especially with humans, like, everyone's like, oh, he's too mean to humans, saying that they're like pudding brains and they're stupid. It's like, this guy has lived for 2,000 years, and he's seen humanity make the same mistakes over and over again, despite his countless lives where he's tried to advise them or steer them on a better path. So if you were if it's like if I was trying to tell you something important and you just kept ignoring me, or or tried to, or did the same thing, it's gonna piss you off, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's gonna.
I do actually think it's quite funny though, because those same people that complain about that, they'll watch Christopher Eccleston say "stupid apes" and they'll think that's great.
They're like, haha, funny. They're like, no, I think I won't deny, like, obviously when you go straight from the end of the Matt Smith, that the culmination of the whole fairy tale thing, to Series 8 Capaldi, it's a massive leap tonally, and I get that, and I completely understand why for some people having a harsher, sharper Doctor straight from Matt Smith might turn them off. I get that completely. But
actually, on that, before I forget, what are your thoughts on the phone call scene at the end of Deep Breath?
The phone call scene. I think when it first aired, I was a bit like, oh, well, I was like, it's clever with like, where it is in the Doctor's timeline, but I was like, is this overshadowing, a new Doctor? But then every time I've rewatched it, I've thought, well, no, I actually don't mind it, because it's that little boost that I think helps Gia Clara to accept him, because I think if there's anything I think we as humans can relate to is we all want to be accepted. Do you know what I mean? For who we are or what we stand for. And the 12th Doctor, especially near the end with Clara, he's not been perfect already, but he's trying his hardest to convince her that, he is the same person underneath.
Yeah.
And
Obviously,
for whatever reason,
there's a scene where he says, it's like, you can't see me. You can't see that I'm the Doctor.
Yeah, and that fucking hit me, because it's like, not because I'm the Doctor, but it's like, just in life, when you're trying to, like, show people who you are, and for whatever reason, whether it's prejudice or ignorance or whatever it is, they can't accept it, or they can't understand it, or they don't see you.
Well, it's quite
so that hit me like a brick.
It's quite an affecting thing when someone doesn't recognize you. Like, funnily enough, yesterday morning, my dad came to where I live, because he lives in a different city to me, and he comes up once every few months to have breakfast with me. So, like, we have a little catch up, and he's decided to, like, grow out his hair and grow out a beard, right? And so he knocked on the door, and my mum answered the door, and she didn't know who it was. She didn't recognize him.
Oh, blimey!
And
damn.
And when he told her that it was, hey, it's Steve. Like, she was like, oh my god. She was like, I didn't recognize you because you look completely different. And I can imagine, to an even more extreme extent, regeneration is a bit like that, where it's like, I'm the same person that I was, a day ago, or 2 days ago, or a week ago, or whatever. But you just don't recognize me, and that, I can imagine how much that would hurt.
Yeah, and I think that's what, in my eyes, redeemed the sort of phone call scene, because I think we've all had or seen moments like that where we've seen someone not be accepted on a base level, and it's it's fucking hard. Like, it's not nice.
Yeah.
And I think even that, like, yes, it's the past Doctor, so some people say, oh, it's still overshadowing. You can call it that if you want, but I think there's something very poetic in that. It's a former version of the Doctor that is helping Clara to convince him to trust himself. It's that weird Doctor Who timey-wiminess. But yeah, I just think I don't have a problem with it now, because I feel it speaks more about Clara as a character. The focus of that scene isn't about, oh, look, the 11th Doctor's back. This is Clara breaking down whatever these barriers are in front of her to see this new man. And I think it builds nicely on what is said earlier in Deep Breath as well. And she's sat with Vastra, and they're having that whole conversation about, well, why is he old? And she's like, what, you thought he was young? He's like, oh, he looked young. Oh, yeah, and who do you think that was for? Do you know what I mean? I think it perfectly builds on that assumption Clara had of who this man was, for, in rather a selfish way, for herself. Whereas Matt Smith, when he rings her, is saying, you've got to help this man now, regardless of what he looks like.
Well, this is where it's going to start getting interesting, because I have things to say about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if I were to start the show from that episode,
yep,
I feel like I would love it the same way that you do. But like things we've mentioned before, this Clara, and obviously the Doctor to an extent too, even though it's a regeneration, but more importantly, Clara is a character who began in Series 7, not Series 8.
Yes.
And so I do take that into consideration, because I know some people would say, oh, you should just forget Series 7 exists and then watch it from Series 8 onwards, and that's Clara. But for me, that's not how characters work. For me, you have to take everything into consideration. And that thing that they do with Clara in Deep Breath, as an isolated incident, not thinking about anything that happened before, it's great. But the reason why it's jarring for me is because in Series 7, she was the impossible girl, and she saw every Doctor. And I don't buy that same person would have that problem.
Yes. Yeah. No, I must. Yeah. No, you. I have no rebuttal to that, because to some extent, yeah, yeah, she's seen the older Doctors, like physically older. So the only thing I would sort of rebuttal to that is maybe See, I'm trying to see. I feel now what I say is more sort of headcanon, which I don't like doing anyway. But for the sake of this, I'll say it.
It's because you're answering for the writer rather than answering what the writer did.
Precisely. Yeah. But I'll say it anyway, just as how I see it in my head is how it's this whole thing of, I think maybe for Clara it's one thing seeing it from like a retrospective point of view to then actually experiencing it. If that makes sense.
I get what you're saying.
And especially considering by the end of the time of the Doctor, because she's obviously been kept away from him for in his life, hundreds of years, and I think that's where because let's face it, Clara loved the 11th Doctor. Well, I know she said fancy him, but she loved him. On that sort of level that say 10 loved Rose, and that really shines in the time of the Doctor. And I think it's like, imagine if you love someone in that way, and then all of a sudden they just disappeared or changed before your eyes.
Well, I think interestingly, I was actually having a conversation earlier today about the regeneration between 9 and 10, in that at the end of Series 1, Rose basically left everything behind and pledged her love for the 9th Doctor, and then straight away he regenerates, and that's really upsetting for her, because she has no idea how to react to it. But, like I said, what happens in Series 1 and what happens in Series 2 in like Christmas Invasion and all that transition, for me it complements each other, whereas with Series 7 and Series 8 it clashes, and I can't quite put my head around it.
No, I will agree. Like, as I say, my explanation there was more of a headcanon thing, but yeah, fundamentally it's like you say, if you watch Series 8 without Series 7, it probably makes a bit more sense tonally, but I do agree with you in the sense that I'm the same with characters. Like, I don't pretend, Series 7 doesn't exist, despite my problems with it. That is where Clara started, and yes, fundamentally that is a written problem, that she's seen all these other Doctors, and of course the War Doctor, who is physically older. She's met that one, and but somehow Peter Capaldi just doesn't click with her somehow, which is a bit bizarre.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a common thing with Clara, is that a lot of what I don't like about her in the Capaldi era all comes back to how she was set up in Series 7, and it's so frustrating because the ideas behind this character, when Moffat thought, right, I'm going to wipe the slate clean in Series 8 and I'm going to just do something completely new. Like, all the ideas he has are really interesting, but because he's using a character he's already introduced and in a completely different way, I can't get into some of this, because I'm like, well, no, because I've seen her do that, and now you're telling me she's this. Yeah.
It's almost like it's banking on us that we've forgotten about Series 7, almost. Yeah. It's almost like they were banking on that happening, and it's just, no, that's one thing I'm not even going to try and, say it's defend it outside of headcanon. That is a problem. Like, fundamentally, that just is a problem. Yeah. So, yeah.
I suppose we should move on to something else about Series 8, because we're really rambling. Danny Pink.
Danny Pink.
So, again, conceptually, very interesting idea. He's a soldier, and he murdered a child in a war, and has a lot of regret about that. And in a lot of ways, I can sense Moffat is setting him up to be a sort of, in some ways, a parallel to the Doctor in that sense, because obviously the Doctor had experience in a war as well, and obviously that is to present a romantic interest for Clara now that Matt Smith is gone. And to be fair, it does lead to some pretty funny moments, like in The Caretaker, when
oh god, yeah.
When the Doctor thinks that Clara's boyfriend is the one that looks like Matt Smith.
That's the one that looks like him, or looked like him, yeah.
He's just like, oh, you're still fancy me, Clara, that's so cute. Yeah, that's quite funny. But in a lot of ways, the Danny Pink character as a concept is meant to be like that, and that's where their clashing starts, in the sense that Danny Pink is a soldier, and like you said about the Doctor wanting to get rid of that notion that he's a commander of soldiers.
Yeah.
And that on paper is really interesting. However, I have a few things to say about Danny Pink.
Go for it.
The first thing is just very strange plot hole, and that's the fact that Orson Pink is meant to be a descendant of him and Clara, and yet he dies in Death in Heaven. So it's not possible.
Yes.
That's really weird.
So, but how, like, well, in a time travel sense, then would it be when they met Orson Pink in Listen? Was that in the timeline at this point where Danny hadn't died, and then when Death in Heaven happened, that would have then erased?
Yeah. So the idea, I suppose, somewhere along the track, fixed time has been reverted around, and again, getting into fixed time in the Moffat era is a doom. Like,
I don't even think Moffat knows what fixed time is in his universe.
I think in Wedding of River Song, I think he just retcons fixed time as being completely redundant
as a concept. Yeah.
Basically, River Song in the episode says, yeah, you know all that like really, really gripping character drama from Russell's era? Yeah, so basically we're going to get rid of that, and it's going to be a sandbox.
Yeah. Pretty much, but no, that's a fair point. Yeah.
So yeah, that's weird, but more importantly, I don't like Samuel Anderson's performance.
Okay, sure.
I find him to be very wooden, especially in any scene where he has to be romantic or confronting Clara. I think the biggest example I can point to is it's the scene in Listen where he's having the date with her, and I get that the way it's written is they're meant to be clashing because obviously he has PTSD over the war, and he's just very confused as to why she's acting so strangely, because obviously she can't tell him that she travels with a man that travels in time. It's a secret.
Yeah.
That also happens to be the caretaker 2 episodes later. But it's this thing of the Doctor's life intruding on Clara's human life, which is something that has happened before and after in New Who. So that part of it's not the problem. It's just when the time comes for the actor to deliver these moments, it doesn't compel me to be interested. It just makes me laugh because he's just so funny when he's trying to be serious. So like you get like when he's being a bad flirt and he's just a bit like, oh, he doesn't really know what he's saying, and it's really awkward and whatnot and all that. And then, but I think the part that makes me laugh the most is when Clara accidentally brings up the fact that she knows that his name is what's his real name?
Oh, Rupert.
Rupert, yeah. When she brings up that she knows his name's Rupert, and then he does this weird frowny face, and then he suddenly says, "You're acting weird, Clara. I don't do weird."
I mean, I'd argue that's just a bad line, as well. Like that is just a bad line.
I know.
I don't do weird. Like what?
But he just
does anyone actively say that on a date? I don't do weird.
Yeah. So I just Samuel Anderson's performance is very. It's kind of. I would say it's so bad that it's good for me. Like I just find it.
Okay.
I can't get invested in the drama because it's just too funny. Unintentionally so, obviously, because it's meant to be a serious moment. And then I think the absolute, because like for the most part, I'll be like, oh well, that was just a bit of cringe romance, whatever. I can get over it. Like it's not terrible. I can get a bit of a laugh out of Danny Pink, and I can sort of see where the concept is going around with his clash with the Doctor. And like I said, the scene in the caretaker and the TARDIS is actually quite good. But the absolute worst for me is when he becomes a Cyberman, and I find it so bizarre that as a Cyberman he's more emotional than when he was as a human.
Isn't there? I could be wrong, but isn't there one line about his inhibitor being broken or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, I think so. But I just found that so funny. And then I can't stand the scene where, and I know it's meant to be very touching drama. Like there's a lot of very I describe it as external drama. Like if you think of the beach scene from Doomsday as very external drama, especially for Rose. Like a lot of the new series does this, but with the Danny scene, I don't think Samuel Anderson pulls that off. I just find it very cringeworthy to watch him try to be this heartbroken character, and just it's the scene where he's standing with Clara in the graveyard and he's sobbing and he's like, "I love you, Clara," and I just can't take it seriously because it just doesn't feel right. His performance just it's so static and mid-tone, and I'm like, oh, it's just bizarre. I can't put my finger. It's weird though because despite the fact that I'm not on board with his performance, I think he's quite a likable person. But I just there's just something off about Samuel Anderson. I can't put my finger on what it is.
I feel I'm half and half with you on this one because there are moments throughout the series where his performance does make me laugh unintentionally. Like always whenever he's doing when we first see him, I think with the Coal Hill Cadets, that scene makes me fucking howl because he's trying to sound like this army sergeant, and it doesn't sound convincing, but also it's funny because the kids aren't buying it either, which just makes me laugh even more.
Yeah.
And the line, I think it's in Death in Heaven, when they reactivate the inhibitor or whatever, and then he's going to send them all, shooting off into the sky. But then he's randomly like, Ted, Sean, look at you horrible lot, or something. It makes me fucking howl. Like, why would you say that? Like, it just, do you know what I mean? It doesn't, like, the rest of that speech is fine, but, like, why he kicks it off like that is just, it's clearly Moffat saying, hey, remember this guy, remember he was, remember he was a soldier? Because he's doing the attention thing? Like, whenever he's whenever he's actively doing soldiery things like that, apart from that scene in The Caretaker, I don't buy it. Absolutely. I don't believe this man has been in wars, and fought and served. Moments where I do believe that are the scenes in Darkwater and Death in Heaven when he's in the Nethersphere and he sees, like, the boy, for example.
Yeah.
Because those scenes on their own are very tense and emotional scenes. Like you said, going back to the concept of murder, just what they are. It's a very intense scene, and I feel that's probably where Samuel Anderson gives one of the best performances of the series for his character in those moments in the Nethersphere, because I think you do truly see
he's good with
he's good with PTSD.
Sorry, go on. He's good with PTSD. I will say that.
Yeah, like those moments when he sat with the child and he sort of is almost, I'd say, on the verge of having like a panic attack. Like I'd argue you believe him. Like, you believe that seeing this boy has triggered this PTSD in him, and it's making him panic. I think it's very believable. And like we've said, I think all the scenes where he's or the majority of scenes where he's confronting the Doctor are great, especially the one in the TARDIS in The Caretaker, as we've mentioned. And also just how he approaches Clara about it, I think, is some of the best sort of family or relative confrontation in New Who, because we've had it before, like in the RTD era, where like Jackie says to Rose at some point, oh, if you go with him, you're going to get hurt, or will I ever see you again? Very, very real questions you'd have if your son or daughter was whisked away from you. But I think the way Danny approached it as well, like how it's like she's like, oh, so you're in a relationship with me, but you're also having adventures with another man. And I know he doesn't necessarily mean it in a loving, that kind of relationship, but I think do you get what I'm saying? Like the way he approaches it is very believable, I think.
Yeah, it's that it's not necessarily that she thinks she's bonking the Doctor or anything. It's not like that. It's more about like you're spending time with someone else, a lot of time with someone else, despite the fact that I'm your partner. I'm meant to be one of your priorities in life. Is that what you mean?
And I think so, yeah. And it's just come to me, one of the best Danny lines, I think, is in the Forest of the Night, near the end. When they think they've found the solution, and they're saying, oh, come in the TARDIS, we'll watch it from space, and all the kids say they just want to go home to their mums and dads. And Clara says to him, rather irresponsibly, considering Danny's the only other adult, she says, oh, come on then, come and see it. It's like, but what about the kids? But Danny just says, sometimes the most wonderful or magical things or whatever are what's like here right in front of you, rather than what's in the stars. And I think you see it hit Clara in that way as well. Even though she goes with the Doctor in that moment, do you know what I mean? It's like he almost gives her a little wake-up call. And it is that summation of what you just said, of he's saying, yeah, like space is great and seeing all these worlds and aliens and whatnot, but if you do love me in the way you say you do, surely that is more wonderful and beautiful than anything you could see out there, sort of thing.
It's a much more... Because I know some people... He's not in any way similar, like, when you really get it down to it, but there are parallels between Danny Pink and Mickey Smith in the sense that they are the boyfriend on the other end of the tug of war with the Doctor. But the biggest difference between them is that Danny Pink is quite, in some ways, because of his experiences, he's quite insightful and he's quite mature. He obviously has issues and problems to deal with himself, obviously, because of his experiences, but he's quite an insightful character. Whereas with Mickey's more, he's much younger, and he doesn't understand how to deal with what's happening to him.
Yes.
And that makes him very relatable because especially for younger viewers, because he's trying to figure out what his purpose is in life. Whereas I feel like with Danny, it's like he knows what he wants and where he's headed, but he just wants his partner to be there with him for it. And because the Doctor's taking her from him, it's causing him to have problems.
Yeah, and I think that whole trifecta of the Doctor, Clara, and Danny with all those things in mind is a great dynamic for a series, which has its great moments. I just, if anything, I wish maybe we got one more series with Danny in it. And I know a lot of that was down to, when they filmed Series 8, it was believed that Jenna was going to go, at the end of Series 8 and then last Christmas, and then she stayed on for Series 9 quite late in the game. But, had it been different, I would have loved to have maybe seen Danny not perish in Death in Heaven and, have sort of extend this relationship for the rest of Clara's time in Series 9. Because it's an issue people bring up often. After we last see Danny in Last Christmas, then Clara seemingly all hunky-dory for Series 9. Danny is, I think, quite literally never mentioned again in the entire show, which is a bit jarring.
There's one reference to him in The Magician's Apprentice, but that's it.
Right. But it is a bit jarring when you get all this high stakes, very intense character drama, which I love for the most part, and then suddenly it's like, right, we're just going to forget any of... And, they try their best in Last Christmas to wrap it up, the whole Danny sends the boy back instead of... Oh, no, sorry, that's in Death in Heaven, isn't it?
Yeah.
But they try and wrap it up with the whole Dream Crabs thing and stuff, but I just think when you've established that much relationship and that level of stakes, to not even mention it again once is very... It's one of the biggest misfires of the Capaldi era, in my opinion, the fact that Danny Pink is seemingly forgotten and never talked about for Series 9 almost at all. I think that's a big misfire. I'm not saying he should have come back... So say the ending of Series 8 stands, he's been a Cyberman, he's dead for all intensive purposes, right? I'm not saying he should have been brought back to life via some Deus Ex Machina thing, whatever. But even if you'd had in an episode or something, like whether it was a flashback scene or, something with him in it, it would have just felt a bit more justified. We're still saying, we acknowledge that this was a big part of Clara's journey, so to speak.
This is where it gets to the point where I'm going to start talking about what I think they should have done instead. And this is now going to tie into Missy. This is going to bring Missy into the fold now. So I think a lot of the ideas in Darkwater and Death in Heaven had the potential to be an amazing story. I think there are amazing moments in the story, but as a whole, it doesn't connect for many reasons. One of them, like I said already before, is Samuel Anderson's performance. I remember the last time I watched Series 8 with my friends when they were watching for the first time. I just kept on saying to them, I'm like, if he was just a better actor, I feel like I'd really like this, but I just can't get into it because of his performance. But more than that, talking more about like the substance of the story, I feel like if you had had a situation where Clara feels like the Doctor was responsible for Danny's death and carrying into Series 9, and obviously this would be in hindsight where Jenna Coleman had already known she was going to stay. Let's say she feels like it's partly the Doctor's fault for Danny being dead, and it stems back to what we were saying about how Danny had that tug of war with the Doctor, and obviously what we were saying about him and In the Forest of the Night and all that. If Clara had a notion that the Doctor, like, if there, and this would again tie into the whole A Good Man arc, if Clara had an idea of maybe the Doctor feels like life with her is better with Danny out of the way, that could have presented some very interesting drama, I think. And like you say, because Danny is completely forgotten about, that doesn't happen, and instead in Series 9 it's handled very differently. But I feel like there was a missed opportunity there to really hammer down Clara saying, well, I had a choice and you took that away from me. But also the fact that because at this point she's been with the Doctor for so long that she feels like she can't leave him. So imagine if in Series 9 it was she feels some resentment towards the Doctor because of Danny's death, but she's so addicted to time travel and addicted to being with the Doctor and loving him like a family member of sorts that she can't bring herself to leave him. I think that could have been some superlative drama, and really dark drama too.
I completely agree, and like you say, it is such a shame that Jenna sort of was flip-flopping between whether she was going to stay or not, because maybe had she known or decided earlier on, obviously, you know, Stephen Moffat might, or the other writers might have done something like that if they had known. But I guess when they were writing Series 8 with the notion that Clara was going at the end of the series, I think that's why the end of Series 8 feels very wrapped up, you know, the way it is, where they meet in the cafe and then they go their separate ways. That's very clearly like the original finale intended, which I think, you know, if that was the finale, I think that's a great exit for Clara.
I really like
as it stands.
I really like that scene as an individual piece where they both lie to each other. I think that's really good.
Yeah. It's a perfect summation of their relationship, isn't it? The top. Yeah.
My favourite scene in all of Series 8 is the scene where the Master lies to the Doctor and he bashes the TARDIS.
Yeah.
And that is even more powerful, and this is, again, unlike what we've been saying about Series 7, this is actually something where the Smith era coming before it actually helped, because if you've seen the Doctor's wife, you'll know that the TARDIS is a living being that can think and is sentient and treats the Doctor like they are partners for life, like they are very close in the Doctor's wife. You can see that, and to see him pretty much abuse this person, this being, this existence that has been with him since thousands of years ago, I think that's really quite telling. It's quite like disheartening, and that is probably my favorite scene in the whole Series 8. Like, that's the one area where I think Moffat absolutely nailed. This is what this Doctor is about in this series, and this is the heartbreaking moment. And I think it's also very refreshing because the Smith era is the finales, they're very much like wrapping it in a bow a lot of the time, and everything's very it's very fairy tale and very, you know, triumphant, save the day stuff, whereas with Death in Heaven it's not like that. Like I said, I wish the execution was a bit more like what I would want, but specifically that moment, it's striking to see the season end on that when you look at what we got before in Moffat's era.
It's almost like it's not completely downbeat, but it is more of that sort of downbeat ending, which I think dramas are often too afraid, not just Doctor Who, a lot of dramas are too afraid to do. I think it's this thing of, they think, audiences need a happy ending. And I think sometimes it's more interesting to leave it on a sort of, opposite note to that, because I'd argue it makes people more interested to see where it goes from the low point.
One of my favourite things about Russell T Davies' finales is that every single one ends on a bittersweet note, and it leaves you with so much. It leaves you with feelings of joy, sadness, and also you feel like your experience over the last 13 episodes is complete, but it also leaves you hanging for what comes next. It's like every time he does it with, the Ninth Doctor regenerating, and there's all this uncertainty about what the hell's going to happen next, and there's like, you're sad that the Ninth Doctor's gone, but you're like, wow, there's a new Doctor, and all the euphoria of wrapping the bow on that character arc in that series. And then you got like series 2 with obviously the Daleks and the Cybermen get sucked into the void, but then also Rose is lost and is on the other side, and there's that bittersweet feeling. And then there's also with Last of the Time Lords, where yes, they saved the Earth, but also the Doctor had to watch the Master die. Obviously he does come back, but the Doctor had to watch someone that he's known for all his life die. And also you had Martha make the decision to walk out on him, which is a massive hit to his ego. Again, it's this bittersweet feeling. And then obviously with Journey's End, it's like, again, they saved the whole of the universe, but Donna lost her memory of the Doctor. And this man who Sarah Jane says you have so many friends, but at the end they're all gone, and he's by himself. And then obviously with with End of Time, it's very much like the dread of dying and all that, and him saying I want to go. But then obviously you get Matt Smith introduced, and now you've got the Moffat era to look forward to and all that. So I really like the way Davies did that. And so with going back to series 8, what we were saying before is this kind of ending brings back a lot more of that bite that was missing from the Matt Smith finales, I feel.
Yes, that's probably what I'd say. It's the bite, that sort of the hard hittingness, and the thing that makes you want to actively come back for the next season, or it gets you speculating about what's going to happen in the next season. It's like, so the Doctor has gone to the coordinates and Gallifrey's not there. What now? Not in a sort of what now then, like in a shrug shoulders way. It's that what is the goal was to find Gallifrey, so what? Where do we go from here?
If you compare that to The Wedding of Riversong, for example, that does a similar thing where it hypes you up for the next series, but the way it does it is the Doctor doesn't die, he was a robot the whole time, and now this headless man is now saying, what is your name, Doctor Who, Doctor Who? It's all just like, it's all just teasing. It's very.
I've got to say, I hate that whole first question shit.
I do too.
I never liked it.
I do.
Not at the time, and not now.
Yeah, I'm the same. But it's very arbitrary. It's dangling a carrot at you, whereas with series 8, it's more your experience watching this character go through this grief makes you want to see what happens to that person next time the episode's on. Like, that's a completely different way of doing it, and I think, whilst I'm personally not a fan of Death in Heaven, that way of ending the series is exactly what I wanted. So it's frustrating.
No, I agree. It's frustrating, but it is the way you want it to end. And just you saying that was your favourite scene. My favourite scene in series 8 comes one episode before in Dark Water. It's the scene where we are led to believe at first, if you've never seen it before, that they are on a volcanic planet.
Oh, yes.
And Clara has all of the TARDIS keys, and she is using them to bait the Doctor to get him to save Danny. And yes, I know, obviously it is just sort of a simulation, and the Doctor was just testing her, which I'll get to. But like watching that, the first time I saw that, when you don't know that going in, I think it's some of the best stakes of the series, and it's also one of, if not the best scene between Peter Capaldi and Jenna Coleman ever, in my opinion. They are both on their A game performance-wise, and it's not just a case of, you can tell, I think, right from the get-go that she means it, not just because she starts throwing the keys, but because, again, of her performance.
Yeah. And
the fact that Capaldi doesn't just go, all right, yeah, don't worry, we'll do it. He's so resistant to it.
It's the most like serious the show has felt in a few years, at least.
Yeah, I mean, how would you feel again? Like that you're facing your best mate saying, "You're going to take me to save my dead boyfriend," and the bit that always hits me every single time is when Capaldi sort of, you can tell he reads what she says, and he just stands straight and he just goes, "No." Do you know what I mean? That very cold, very stark no. No bell. Yeah. No bells, no big speech at first. Exactly. It's just no.
Because if this scene
like
had
a straight no.
If this scene had the 11th Doctor in it, it would be very like he would be panicking. He'd be like, "No, Clara, you can't do that," and it would be very grandiose, I suppose. But with
and like I think that panicky thing would be fine maybe for the Matt Smith Doctor, but I think for the stakes of the scene, for Capaldi to be so cold and so resolute in where he stands, I think makes it so much more gripping, because then you see Clara start to panic.
Well, with
because she's thinking,
what you were saying about the performance, I get and feel and understand more about this character from that one no.
Yeah.
Than if I got this big blabbery speech from Smith. You know, he just says one word, but the way he says it in his performance, it tells me so much about how he's feeling in the scene. And it's almost like a less is more scenario.
And I think it works both ways. You know, if you see it just on first broadcast as they are actually on this volcanic planet, or even in the context of this is just, you know, a simulation and the Doctor knows that. But even though he knows that, he's not playing around with it. Do you know what I mean? He's standing firm with it. And the whole speech, you know, when he starts turning the tables, when he's like, "Fine, you know, throw away the key," and then you see Clara start to panic, and he's not catering to that at all. A lot of other Doctors would have gone for a more comforting approach, whereas this Doctor is just he's not doing that. And I think this is what I like about Capaldi's Doctor in Series 8. He doesn't do the things you would normally expect many an incarnation of the Doctor to do, which I think is great to subvert an audience's expectations of a character they thought they knew. Because in my eyes anyway, in that scene especially, it feels justified, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying, yeah. I do love that scene. It's probably my favourite in terms of acting. It's probably my favourite from Series 8. But where the story loses me is the fact that, and again, like, it's a really neat idea, I suppose, but I can't really get into the whole, like, afterlife thing. Like, where it's like, suddenly Moffat's like, oh, when people die, they go to the sphere, and now the Doctor is going to take Clara to the afterlife to try and get Danny back. It's like, it's bonkers, and I respect that, but I don't know. I don't think I can get into that. That, to me, is a bit far-fetched.
Okay, yeah. I think just because we're on it, I think it's a good point to bring up. What's your thoughts on the whole "don't cremate me" angle? Because that's one that's often hotly debated, for better or worse, amongst fans.
So, oh god, that's a.
Because I think the most common criticism of it is people are saying it's too far for Doctor Who in terms of a concept.
So for me, it's not necessarily like the content, like the sort of like parental content or whatever. Because I love edgy bollocks. I love I love adult content. Like some of my favorite Doctor Who, like on Big Finish, and like some of my favorite Torchwood episodes are very, very grim. So it's not about that. It's more just. I think it's understandable why some people don't like it, because I think it's a very I'm trying to like be careful with my words because it's a very touchy subject, but cremation is something that people believe in, and by having characters say "don't cremate me," it's almost encouraging not to cremate people in real life. Like, I think some people get that from it, and I think That's
Okay.
where people turn sour on it. However, having said that, just removing the real life meta implications within the story, it's horrific. Like it's good for horror to hear someone say that. Like it's a
Yeah.
really nasty, really really gripping scene. But I just think that where it maybe could have been handled better is the messaging behind it. I don't think there isn't really a reason for it to be in there other than it's a scary moment, if you get what I'm saying. But it doesn't really.
Yeah.
I don't think Moffat knew the implications that would have on the messaging of the episode. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I get you. I mean,
Yeah.
I do. It is sort of mentioned like that initial time, and then never really brought up again in Death in Heaven all that much, which is a little odd. But in terms of like the concept of it, again being careful with words, I didn't necessarily have a problem with it at the time, nor now, because I think Doctor Who has always treaded that fine line. You know, it's always been that question, isn't it? Like, you know, what's too far for Doctor Who? This sort of weird demographic it appeals to, where it's sort of for everyone. So you've got to be mindful of like the younger audience members and the older ones. But I remember speaking to a cousin of mine at the time who watched it, who I think was about 8 or 9 years old, and you know, I said, "Oh well, what did you think of that scene?" And they were like, "Oh, I found it really like jarring and scary and stuff, but it didn't." You could tell, like, and they said it didn't really leave like, you know, a lasting impact. They didn't have nightmares about it or whatever. And I know every child's different, but in terms of a concept, I don't think toying with concepts of death and after death is too far for Doctor Who.
Yeah,
depending on how it's handled.
I think I've heard some people say that it's more so like if you're a child and one of your like grandparents has just recently passed away,
Yes.
and was
Yes.
cremated, that could be a problem.
Yes, I can see that. But again, I think it's back to this fine line thing, isn't it? Because that, you could argue, out of all the audience, that could affect however much percent. And I'm not saying that to sound insensitive, but I just think from a writing standpoint, Moffat must have thought, well, you know, I either do this or I don't. And he must have, for whatever justification he found it, that he would do it. And I remember at the time it actually did receive some complaints here in the UK from Ofcom, which is like the broadcaster's watchdog, and the BBC just said something like, you know, oh, it was built up as it was going to be a hard-hitting statement from the characters, and the Doctor instantly dismissed it as fake or, you know, not true or whatever, which was a bit of a weird response from the BBC on that one, I must admit. But yeah, I mean, overall though, I agree with you that the concept isn't really sort of fleshed out that much beyond that initial, you know, reveal. Like, it isn't really brought up again. But yeah, but in terms of the concept itself, I didn't necessarily have an issue with it the way some people do.
Yeah. So I was going to get onto it because I mentioned about the afterlife, like, netosphere thing. I mean, some people might think I'm closed-minded for this, but I just... It's walking the line of jumping the shark for me. The whole concept of the afterlife, and people, when they die, they go to this sphere. And it's obviously a much darker version of what Moffat usually does, because Moffat is famous for not killing off characters. The only one he actually leaves stay dead is Danny, but he still had a chance to come back if he wanted to. He just chose not to, because he chose to save the kid, which is admittedly a very good scene. But I just find it a bit far-fetched, and this isn't just a Death in Heaven thing. There's quite a few areas where I can't like get into some of the concepts, and I think the one that everyone always talks about with this series is Kill the Moon.
Yes. Good old moon is an egg.
Yeah, the moon is an egg, and obviously some people are like, "Oh, it's a sci-fi show. You know, the moon being an egg is an interesting idea." Blah blah blah, and I get that, but where the moon being an egg jumps the shark for me is not even necessarily the fact that it is an egg. I mean, obviously it's ridiculous, but like in a way, if you were to work it in the sense of, oh, it's an egg and it hatches and there's if there was a way to do it, then there's a way to do it, and I could be like, okay, I mean, it's bonkers, but I can accept it. But where that becomes just ridiculous to me, I just can't get my head around it, is the fact that it hatches, and there's a space dragon that lays an egg that's the same size as itself. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, well, is this space dragon's womb dimensionally transcendental, and was it pregnant inside its own egg?
Well, I mean, these are the big questions we have to ask. Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I'm one of those people who, for the most part, will defend Kill the Moon, so I do quite enjoy it. But yeah, if there's one thing I would agree with you on, it is that thing of exactly what you said, the moon laying an egg that is the size of itself. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not claiming to say I'd write a better solution as to how we can have a new moon, but I just don't think that was it, because it does it is just out of nowhere.
I think that episode would work better if it wasn't on Earth.
Yeah.
Like if
it was like another planet, so to speak.
If it was a planet somewhere else that had moons, and again, another thing another thing that baffles me about Kill the Moon is the whole scene where Clara asks the world to vote doesn't make any sense to me, because half of the world is on the other side in the light.
So you'd only see half of the world's light. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So Kill the Moon for me, and I have a much more substantive reason to bring this up. It's not just me like being old, that's a really silly thing that doesn't make sense. A lot of what happens in Kill the Moon, and the way the plot's written, and the way it has problems, has a direct negative impact on what the episode tries to do at the very end with the Doctor and Clara, because again, like on paper, I can see why people love that scene where they have that clash at the end, but I can't get into it because of what happens beforehand, where the way that Peter Harness writes the characters based on what happens in the plot, because that for me is kind of doesn't work. It becomes jarring at the end. It feels unearned to have that moment at the end for me, and unfortunately that's a big problem, because Kill the Moon is an essential episode for their characters in Series 8, and a lot of what happens in Mummy and the Orient Express, Flatline in the Frost of the Night, and even the finale to an extent, comes right off that episode and what happens at the end of that. And so unfortunately for me, because of the way the plot of Kill the Moon is handled, I can't get into the drama, and because I can't get into the drama, it doesn't work for the rest of the series. It's a big shame, because
it's like a game killer for you then, in that sense.
It's a game. It's like it's like a stack of dominoes, and once you push one down, they all just fall down.
They all just go, yeah.
And it's really frustrating, because the performances in that scene are absolutely amazing. Like the acting in that scene from Jenna Coleman and Peter Capaldi at the end of that episode is extraordinary, but I just can't get into the story, so it just doesn't work.
I mean, it does have its problems, like I say, about the moon and the whole voting thing. I think why I liked it is because it shifts so quick. I sort of like the tonal shift of it, how it starts off from being, let's take Courtney for a trip in the... it sort of starts off a bit more jovial, sort of taking Courtney out to show her how special she is and show her more of the universe or whatever. But then it very quickly turns into this very, very dangerous, very immediate situation. And what I like about it is when Courtney tells Clara that she's scared, Clara, naturally does that very teachery thing of, we need to get her to a place of safety then, which in this case is the TARDIS. And the Doctor's sort of complete denial of that reaction, I like, not in the sense of that I agree with him. It's back to this thing of the whole conflict, between the Doctor and Clara as these characters, that Clara is, just being relatably a teacher, saying she has a duty of care, but the Doctor's just not seeing it, or not in the same way. And then the fact that he leaves, lets them make their own decision. Again, I like that element, because it now presents us with the situation, oh right, the Doctor seemingly isn't going to save the day right from the get-go. He's letting his companions do it, which I think, it's not a situation we often see. We've seen situations where companions help save the day, but I think we rarely see a situation where the Doctor actively chooses to take himself out of the situation, if that makes sense, for reasons or otherwise.
Yeah.
And then I think all of that builds to that final confrontation scene where you see the two different views of these characters. The Doctor thinks he did it as a sign of respect to Clara and the human race, whereas Clara views it as being patronizing, views it as being cruel. And I think it's that whole dichotomy is very relatable, I think, to audience members, because, we've all had situations where there's two people and something's happened and one of them will say, oh, well, I did it because of this. But then the person say, well, no, I took it as this. Do you know what I mean? It's that
misunderstanding.
It's that two different viewpoints. And I think that scene just, for me at least, in that part of the episode, that whole the Doctor leaving and being like sort of a bit cruel throughout the whole thing, I think is great, because again it shows us this side of a character we rarely get to see, and it ties back to this whole never cruel or cowardly thing. And I know Moffat loved to use never cruel or cowardly, even though it was the great Terrence Dicks, but I think sometimes a lot of people interpret that as never cruel or cowardly means he can never be those things, like ever, right? Whereas I always thought, on the whole, morally, that's what he wants to be, never cruel or cowardly, but it doesn't mean he's incapable of it. And I think in Kill the Moon, that is an example of that, or at least from Clara's viewpoint. And I think that's why it's great that Moffat chose to include or Peter Harness, chose to include the word cruel in how Clara took it, because you can see that hits Capaldi's Doctor, that, he's always trying to be not cruel and not cowardly, yet the person he cares for the most, his best friend, is accusing him of being cruel.
Yeah.
And I think just that whole strand of Kill the Moon, I really enjoyed that sort of tension between the Doctor and Clara. It's interesting how, as you say, for you it's necessarily a game killer for their relationship for the rest of the season, whereas for me, I just think, for me at least, it strengthens it.
Yeah, because the thing is, a lot of people would say, for a different reason to me, they would say they don't like the clash, and that's why they don't get it because they don't like the conflict that they have. For me, it's that it's a bit different in the sense that it's not that they have conflict, because I think conflict can be great, but it's just because of the plot having a direct influence on why they make the decisions that they do, and because I think that Peter Harness misjudged the plot. And basically what I'm trying to say is that the decisions that they make are based on things that Peter Harness thinks the plot is doing, but because for reasons that I have stated, and there's a whole bunch of more I could get into, but there are things that I don't think the writer realizes, at least when he was writing it. Maybe he realizes on rewatch or whatever, retrospectively, but there are errors in his writing that cause the plot to do things that I don't think he realizes it does, that has a ripple effect on, well, the writer thinks that the situation is this, and therefore the characters make this decision to do that, for that reason, blah, blah, blah. But because he misjudged what he was doing, and because there are problems with the plot in itself that directly impact why these characters make these decisions, when I notice these problems, it then impacts how believable I feel it is for these characters to make these decisions. And so, when I see the Doctor making decisions like that, or when I see Clara react like that, it does not translate the way the writer wants it to for me, because the way I see the plot is different to the way the writer sees the plot, because of errors that I have found in it, if that makes sense. And
no, I get you.
And so, it, as a structure, it just falls apart a bit.
No, I understand that, and like I said, there are moments for me where maybe it's just a case of you see it in a deeper, or like you see more of the subtleties than I do, like, because I'm a bit dim, but there are problems with it. I agree, like the ones we mentioned, but yeah, I'd be more than happy to give Kill the Moon another rewatch and see if I view it in a different way with that in mind. But for me, it's just
I obviously don't want to ruin anything you love or anything like that. But I'm
No,
just,
no. I mean, no, that's
but
fair.
I do. But if someone asks me what I think of it, I'm going to point out why it doesn't work for me, and that's
No, as you should.
yeah.
As you should. You shouldn't have to alter it for anyone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's why I like doing like this sort of chat with you, because like of what we've discussed so far, like I've heard opinions that I necessarily haven't heard before on episodes, and to me that's interesting. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to know why. I want to know like why or what made you take it that way. Not saying that you're wrong, not at all, but yeah. So no, it's good. It's interesting.
Yeah. The one other episode of Series 8 that I want to touch on, that's a big one. We have briefly touched on it before with Danny Pink and all that, but specifically for Clara, and the Doctor, I suppose, is listen. Because
the pretentious one.
yes, so listen. I watched this. I rewatched this one very recently, so it's fresh in my mind. I could go into the concept and the thing about hiding and all that, and how it sets up a monster and then doesn't reveal it, and then goes more into like character drama instead. It's a big twist. It's like part of the episode's twist, right? It's almost. I think a lot of people hate listen. A lot of people that do hate listen are because they were expecting something to happen, and because it doesn't happen, they're upset. And instead, what it does is it's more a metaphor for what is going on internally for these characters. But the reason why it doesn't work for me, and this ties back to, and not just because I perceive it this way. This is actually, I'm almost certain this is intentional on Moffat's part, because he's very clearly referencing this. The very end of Listen, when Clara goes to Gallifrey, to Longbarrow, to the Doctor's, home when he's a child. That's it.
Yeah.
This is almost a callback to her being the Impossible Girl, because in a way she is going back into the Doctor's past and influencing his time. And obviously in The Name of the Doctor it's a bit different. Like in Series 7 it's much more, she's stopping the Great Intelligence from fucking up his life, and that's why she's still throughout time. It's very conceptually like, oh, look at this, I'm the Impossible Girl, I was born to save the Doctor, blah blah blah, and all that. But with Listen, it's much deeper than that. It's her going back to when he was a child, and there's two things for me that don't work about it. Firstly is it was a complete coincidence that she ended up there. So her being impactful at that point in time happens by accident, completely by accident. Now, the fact that they get there because of the whole telepathic circuits is all great. The way that it ties into like how she found Danny as a child, well, Rupert, for example, and then Orson, obviously, and then you get all that. Like the way that the accident actually happens, I can see how they get there. But the fact that the impact she makes happens completely arbitrarily feels forced to me. And then also, on top of that, I know it ties into, the themes of the episode and the series and the whole thing about him being a commander of soldiers and whatnot. But when you think about the Doctor's timeline in a more literal sense, like removing what the message of the episode is and just looking at Doctor Who as a canon, as a character, it kind of implies that Clara is a big part of why the Doctor is who he is. And that is a lot of pedestal to give a companion. Now, not to say that you can't ever do that, but for me, because it's so arbitrary and because it's so left field and so just, to me, unearned, it feels forced, and I can't get into that. I can't get into Clara's pedestal in the Doctor's life and her level of importance in his life just happening because the TARDIS happened to get her there by accident. I don't like that. And if I were to give an example of something else that's somewhat similar, there are other companions in the Doctor's life that are very important, similar to Clara. Maybe not quite on the same level, because Moffat really does make her very important to the Doctor. We'll get to that in Series 9. But there are other companions that are very important to the Doctor. I think one that's you could definitely point to in the modern series is Rose Tyler. Rose Tyler is very important to the Doctor post Time War. But for the reasons why she's important to him, for me, are much more organic in the way they're built up. There's more I can tell you about why she's important to the Doctor, about how she becomes important to them, the way she meets him, the way she impacts him, and you see that all happen. Whereas with this, it's not that Clara's, influence on him happens here and now. It's very much the TARDIS, by accident, took her back to when he was a child. And then she had an influence on him as a child, and then looped that back around to him now. And I can't get into that myself. And I get what the message of the episode's trying to do. I understand what the theme is and what it's trying to be, but that one element of it feeling forced, it buckles under all the weight, and it just falls apart, and I don't like it.
Okay, wow. Well, I can't say I've heard it put like that before. That's a new one to me. But again, I think I remember when I watched it at the time when it first went out, and I must admit I did think it was quite like a neat way to tie it in. I must admit, and I really did like it. The whole how she ends up there and all that. And I think Doctor Who, to some extent, you could argue, is along this specifically being about the part where you say it was almost like an accident. Doctor Who, in a way, always feels like a long string of happy accidents. The amount of times the things have happened by accident, or characters have got somewhere by accident, and it. Do you know what I mean? I think so. I think I can look past that necessarily. The whole thing about Clara's pedestal, I do understand it to a degree, and there was a time where I thought, Clara is being jigged up as this is the all-seeing, all-knowing companion, if you like. She's done all this stuff, and like you say, it's very eerie of the whole impossible girl situation. But I guess the question I'd say is, if that was any other companion, do you think you'd feel the same? Like if it was Bill, or if it was Amy or Roy, do you know what I mean? Like, is it just because of the history Clara has at this point, do you think, or?
That's a very good question.
Because I know what you mean, like with the whole, it is reminiscent of the Impossible Girl, and that's what a lot of people cite it back to. It's like, oh, Clara's the most important, person in the world again to the Doctor. So I'd be curious, like, if you'd think if it was any other companion from, say, like New Who or this era, do you think it would be the same? You'd have sort of the same reaction to it, or? Well,
we're gonna assume that it's another companion from New Who that isn't the Impossible Girl from Series 7. Are you saying that it's? Let's say they
say it's just there's no Impossible Girl. Say if it was like Bill, say if Listen was in Series 10, a few episodes in, so Bill knows the Doctor a bit, he's a pretty cool guy, they have a bit of fun, then this happens. Would it suit better with that, someone who's got a bit more of a fresh slate? Or
okay, so in this instance, now that we're changing who's in the scene, if it plays out exactly the way it does, I would find it jarring that Bill would deliver a speech like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel in character for Bill. Now, to be fair, it does feel in character for Clara to give a speech like that, but that's only because we've seen her do it before.
Yes, it's the precedent of it, isn't it?
Yeah, like in the Time of the Doctor, you have that scene where the Doctor's about to die, and then she reaches into the crack and asks the Time Lords to save him. So we've seen her do these speeches before. We've seen who did this before. That's why it feels more in character for her than it would for, say, Bill.
Yeah.
But despite that, I still don't like that happens because of the implications that it has, and also the way it happens.
Sure. I think maybe it would have been more interesting, maybe in hindsight, than if Clara maybe was still there, but maybe she wasn't the instigator of it. Maybe she witnessed it, that moment where the Doctor started, being listening out and that whole someone grabbing your foot or being under your bed. Maybe if she'd witnessed that initial event, so she could understand why he's like that, would that be a better scenario, do you think?
Well, yeah, because the whole point of in that sense for Listen is that it sets up earlier in the episode that the Doctor has the same nightmare that you all have about someone under your bed grabbing your leg, and it's meant to represent the Doctor's fear. Like it's meant to represent this whole thing about the Doctor's fear, right? It's taking a very introspective look about how the Doctor works in terms of like finding out what he's scared of, and so that's why you have this monster that we don't even know exists. We don't even know if it's real, and that's why he's looking around the universe to try and find it, and he doesn't even know it's real. It's just a theory, and it's sort of trying to suggest of, well, what if the Doctor was so fearful that he completely made up something that didn't even exist? And that very much ties into anxiety, actually, and I would understand because I have anxiety, so I understand what it's like to completely fabricate false truths just because you think it could be real, and I like that idea. But then it goes into the typical Moffat thing of, we find out early in the episode that the Doctor is scared of that nightmare, and the reason why is because Clara grabbed his leg as a kid.
Yeah. Well, when you put it like that, yeah. So...
and I think that is very Moffat.
Oh yeah, it's very Stephen Moffat. I think why I still like Listen so much though is because I think more, like we're saying, more about the overall concept of it and the idea that it's building to a threat that we never actually see. Like, I love that concept. I love it when Doctor Who goes left field like that, and obviously it gives you an insight, as you say, into this Doctor as well, obviously, because at this point, 3 episodes before, we've only seen him be a bit more, as you say, a bit more sardonic, a bit more stern, a bit more uptight, but now we get to see him a bit more vulnerable, like he's showing that he's actually afraid of something. And I think that's why I don't mind the whole Clara grabbing his leg scene so much, because I think to me it shows me that it's an insight into how vulnerable this Doctor actually is, or like the character as a whole actually is, regardless of who he is, regardless of the fact he's a Time Lord that travels in time and he's so many thousand years old. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, it shows he's just as vulnerable as the rest of us, and I found that very relatable in that sense.
Yeah.
Like, just because I know some people look to characters like the Doctor saying, oh, he shouldn't have these sort of fears because he's meant to be like not like us, and that's why we sort of look to him as a comfort. And I understand that, but I always find it more interesting when I see characters like that sort of share that same sense of vulnerability that's not just human, it's just, I think it's part of just being, if that makes sense.
Well,
just
yeah,
of being
I think
a presence.
One of my favourite things about Russell T Davies, and to an extent Stephen Moffat, is that they take relatable human emotions that we feel and they amplify it for the Doctor, in the sense of, what if these conditions were given to an alien? So I always rattle on about how much I love the 9th and 10th Doctor, and one of the reasons why is that RTD takes mental illness that is a human condition and thinks, well, what if this was the Doctor? What if an alien who had been through a war has this, like, how would that translate to an alien? And then he shows it happen. He shows what it would be like if the Doctor had PTSD, or if the Doctor had an ego and a hubris. Like, I love that, and I can see that in this series, in this episode again, Moffat's trying to get across what if portraying the Doctor's fear and anxiety through the made up monster and the fear, and Clara going to when he was a kid. But it's just it's for me, it's too speculative, and it's not concrete enough. And I understand it's meant to be about interpretation, but there is too much. How do I put this? There's too much like too much magic, not enough meat, or like too much sugar, not enough savory. And I have that issue a lot with the Matt Smith era, but it's in a much more like swashbuckling way as opposed to a thematic way. But it's similar in the sense that there is a lot of Moffat's era for me is quite mawkish. It's quite saccharine. It's not very it's not as grounded as I would like it to be. And to be fair, a lot of Capaldi's era isn't as mawkish and saccharine as Matt's era is, but there are episodes like this when the sentiment gets brought to the forefront, and like the theme is darker, but it's still very saccharine, and it's very, it's really, really, really like enforcing that the Doctor is this very magical being that exists, and you get that whole speech at the end with Clara, and you have like the very sort of Hollywood Moffat-y lines of "Don't be a soldier, be a doctor" or something like that. I can't remember what she actually says, but it's very, I don't know what the word is, but it's very not telegraph, but it's a speech. It's a very grandiose, sugary speech. It's not subtle. It's not like blunt. It's very fantasy, fairy tale sort of thing.
They always say with like, I think any speech in TV or film, it's like to pull it off well is to make it not sound like you're delivering a speech. And do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like it's more natural. And yeah, a lot of that speech in Listen, like, I think is very speechy. It just sort of, it starts and it ends. You can tell like where it starts and ends. But no, I think on that sense, I think overall on like the idea of it, we might have to agree to disagree on that one, just because I think overall, like the idea of it, as I said, I'm fine with Clara being there and it interact. Like I remember I watched it recently myself, and I still, I didn't, red flags sort of weren't going off in my head about it. I was overall quite happy with it, really, because I think again I relate to it more on that whole sort of, as I said, like the vulnerability angle of it. And I think just seeing Clara almost tell the Doctor it's okay to be vulnerable. Now, should she be the one to tell him that? Arguably not, maybe not. But I just think, I think we've all had it in life. Like you said, you have anxiety yourself, and I have it too. And it's just, I know at least it's always in those moments where things are a bit, quite dark in your head or whatever. Even just having someone close to you say it's that thing of it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to be afraid, sort of thing. I think that's what I took away the most from that scene, and I think that's why I sort of maybe forgive it a bit more than your interpretation of it. So yeah, overall, I think that's why I really like it for that angle.
I'm almost thinking, would I like the episode more if, rather than going back to, Gallifrey and saying that to him as a kid, like you could just still have the scene where she grabs his leg, but or something like that. I don't know, but speculatively, just thinking about it, I'm just thinking, would I like it more or less if everything she said at the end of the episode she said to the actual 12th Doctor in the present? Like let's say, for example, he got to a point where he had become so to coin a phrase, hell-bent on finding this monster that actually we don't even know exists. And I think Clara gets to the point where she realizes that him going through all of this isn't necessary. Like he's putting himself through too much torture to just find the answer. Yeah. And I think if we got to a point where the Doctor sort of just had a bit of an internal crisis of like not really, basically, if it all boiled over and he sort of realized that a lot of what he was doing, he was fabricating himself, and it tied into the whole thing of fear. And if, like, obviously Robot of Sherwood is a fun episode, but if you had restructured Series 8 in the sense of up to that episode, it was they were butting heads a lot, and there was a lot of tension between them, and then for her to say that thing about fear, and also I will just add, in character, like it would have to be a thing where I would actually believe that Clara would say that and know to say that.
Yeah.
But if you had a scene where she actually said that to the current Doctor as he's laying vulnerable, and that is a moment where the Doctor and Clara are finally see each other truthfully, and you actually see the love between them in that moment. I think I might like it more than what we got.
Yeah, well, that's fair, and I agree. I mean, that does sound like an interesting concept, and probably from the way you put it, might have worked better. As you say, it might have been like one of those crucial stepping points for 12 and Clara in being able to, like you say, see each other truthfully. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, maybe it would work better.
Though I do understand that you can't really have the kill the moon scene if that happens before it. But it's I'm just being speculative about what could happen.
Well, I would argue, I would argue you still could, because I think again both for them and the audience, as you see through like drama beats and Doctor Who, if you have that moment, say in Listen, the hypothetical one we're talking about, where they see each other truthfully, I think as an audience member, you think, oh great, they've finally connected and this is great, and now we're gonna go on. But then to see them, I think if the kill the moon stuff still happened, I think that would be a great shift, because for an audience it's like, whoa, like we thought they were sort of like cool now, and then I think for Clara as a character, it's maybe saying to her, I thought I reached this man, I thought I got him, but there's either it's still I've still not got him fully, or he's acting like this for a different reason, perhaps.
Yeah,
so I think it'd actually be more interesting if you left the kill the moon stuff in with this hypothetical scene for Listen.
It would be a sense of like she's only covered one side of him. There's so much more to dig. There's so much more to get into. Because
I feel Clara as a character is very much like that. When she feels like she's cracked them, she's only really cracked of a lot of characters. She feels she's only.
Another way you could do it is that it's almost a response, in the sense of Listen was Clara trying to. Dealing with the Doctor's fear, and almost in this sense in Kill the Moon you could almost frame it as the opposite. You could frame it as the Doctor trying to solve one of Clara's inner problems. You could frame it that way, and it backfires. Like, it doesn't work the way that Listen did. And actually,
now I'm thinking this scene from Listen you've made up might be better now, because it sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah. And also, actually, funny you say that, because I just suddenly remembered, and this is from people know this is from my favorite series in New Who. In series 3, at the end of Lazarus Experiment, and then also 42, Martha and the Doctor are on amazing terms. Like they've finally figured out what's going on. Like, obviously you get the scene in a gridlock and all that, and then the Doctor invites her on the TARDIS permanently and gives her a TARDIS key at the end of 42, and you get the feeling that they are on the way to becoming best friends after all the conflict. And then right after that you get Human Nature Family of Blood, where John Smith falls in love with Joan Redfern and it all comes crashing down for her.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, but that's why it's interesting. Like, I think it's subverting not just character expectations, but for the audience as well. Like, sure, we like to feel, like you say, those moments like, oh, great, they're cool now then. But then to be thrown off, obviously it has to be justified. I'm not saying they should do it just for the sake of it. But I think in Series 8 terms, Kill the Moon's stakes and plot that actually happens would work really well with this hypothetical alternative scene from Listen that you've mentioned. Just because, again, it's just leading Clara into that false sense of it almost echoes what Jodie said in her most recent season, to her companions, like, I've lived for over 2,000 years, how long have you been here, sort of thing. It's humans think, you've been with someone for a few months. In human terms, you think, oh well, I think I know someone then. But for the Doctor and Alien, it's completely different. So for Clara, she maybe thinks, as you say, oh, she's cracked him now then. But for the Doctor, she's barely scratched the surface, maybe.
Yeah, and actually, this also goes back to something that I was discussing with Will Maddox on another video about the 12th Doctor and Clara in Series 8, is that if you got a moment like that, what I described at the end of Listen, of seeing what we actually want in the end from this Doctor-companion relationship, seeing the true what love between these characters would be in that moment, would then, and seeing what, like, because obviously we don't get that, and I feel like if we actually got a glimpse into the Doctor and Clara's true love relationship without all of the baggage, without the tension, if we saw a moment of it, it would be more impactful when they do fight later.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Because, I mean, the central thing, as we've said, I think near the start, is that the Doctor and Clara are toxic for each other. Like, I think that's well known, and that's where, where the consequences come in later in Series 9. But yeah, I think with that in mind, just because they're toxic for each other doesn't mean they can't have those moments of, like you say, where you see the pure love between them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think had we seen that more, not just in Listen, but maybe sprinkled a little bit more throughout Series 8 and 9, it would then make the ramifications of their toxicity for each other, and in consequence the finale of Series 9, even more impactful. Because I think there's a sort of bittersweetness about seeing a couple that are toxic for each other and often have arguments, that when you see those moments where they actually have that love for each other, it becomes even more heartbreaking when that lasts for so little a time and then it gets broken again.
Yeah. And the fact that you could almost formulate their relationship around just like they want those moments to happen, and they're so few and far between, but they just desperately clinging on to when they happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is the perfect foundation of a toxic relationship, sadly. Yeah.
Also, okay, so now let's move forward a bit. Something that I was going to say before, but we got sidetracked into all this other great stuff. So going back to Missy now. Like with knowing Jenna Coleman was going to stay to Series 9 would have been beneficial to Series 8. If Stephen Moffat, when he was doing Series 7 and 8 and all that, if he knew he was going to stay until Series 10, and knew that he was going to do a Master Redemption arc in Series 10 from the start, then a lot of the foreshadowing and the planning, I think, would have worked better. And I'll go into exactly what I mean by this. So let's go on the alternative death in heaven idea I had of Clara having some resentment towards the Doctor because she thinks that he has a part in Danny Pink's death. This would then tie into, I think, would have been a great way for the Doctor and the Master in Series 8, well, Missy obviously, in that I think it would have been great if the Doctor at first wanted the Master to become his friend again. And this, again, this ties directly into when we last saw the Master in The End of Time, if you remember what happened at the end of that. So if we're taking the last time we met and we put it here, you have the Doctor wanting the Master to turn and be his friend again, but then when in the finale the Master is responsible for not only Danny Pink dying but causing Clara to become resentful of him, he then becomes resentful of Missy. Like, it's like a chain effect.
It's like a chain reaction, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I like that.
And I think if Missy had done that, if Missy had caused that all to happen, what you could have done is you could have had the Doctor lose complete faith in the Master ever turning, and then when that happens, once you get to Series 10, you have a more natural build-up of Missy has done something that has caused the Doctor to hate her again. And it takes a lot for Missy to convince the Doctor that she wants to redeem herself. And I think another thing I would have to add is I think somewhere Missy there would have to be a motivation for her to change. You probably could have done it in Series 9, I don't know. I can't quite pinpoint where. But there would have to be something where the action that she chose to make in Series 8, she then reflects on and then decides that she regrets it, and then decides to transition into what we actually got in Series 10. And then the tension of the Doctor not trusting her is stemming from what she did in Death in Heaven. Like, that's the idea that I would have had for her arc. Now, what we actually get is a bit different, and I think it's down to the fact that Moffat didn't know he was going to do Series 10 until he did it. And so, for me, a lot of what we get in Missy in Series 8 and 9 feels a little disconnected from Series 10. And so, the actual redemption arc itself in Series 10, it has elements that I love, and there are parts of it that make up an arc that I think could be great. But I don't feel like there's enough of a punch to set it in motion for it then to happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think because Series 10 was very much Moffat's take on, we're going to do it was this whole, we're going to do sort of the pseudo reboot thing, the whole with the pilot, it's going to be a good jumping on point. And that's not to say I think he thought, right, well, I'm not going to ever acknowledge what happened in Series 8 and 9, but it almost feels like in how it's done, like you say, that he's not trying to pay it much heed, more for that sake of he's trying to introduce this idea of who Missy or the Master is again to potentially new audiences, which is fine. But I think, again, like as you've mentioned, considering the events of what we got and then how crucial Missy has been to this Doctor as well, it almost feels like a bit of a misfire that he doesn't pay that more heed in a way. Because even though, like you say, he didn't know he was going to do Series 10 at the time, I buy that, but he's a clever man. I think he could have easily written it a different way where it would have still tied in more and maybe made the arc more impactful or something like that. But for whatever reason, I think because of the whole pseudo reboot thing, he chose not to.
Yeah. Yeah, and so in a sense, Missy for me has an ending, but the beginning doesn't really happen. And so it's just a bit awkward for me because I can see this being a really good arc for the Master, but I also don't think there's enough justification at the start of it for it to actually happen, and it kind of it puts a little bit of a sour taste on it, but it just about gets away with it because everything that he does with Missy in her last episode I really like, especially bringing John Sim back and having that parallel. So it's the ending of her arc is amazing, but I just wish that the start of it kickstarted it better and put it into motion.
Yeah, because she does, she just sort of, especially in the Series 8 finale, as much as I do enjoy it, she does I know she's been teased throughout Series 8, but when she's revealed to the Doctor, she just sort of first of all, she sort of appears, and then, it ends, and then Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar, it's almost like, again, a lot of that is forgotten, outside of the fact that the Doctor, had lied to Clara about Missy being dead. Yeah, no, I agree. The start of her character is a little bit garbled, but I find her probably the most compelling version of the Master so far in New Who, just because of what at least they tried to do with her. And in terms of the menace of the Master, the brutalness of her, I think it might be down to performance rather than characterization, but I believe Michelle Gomez the most in how she's going about doing these things, if that makes sense.
I get what you're
in
saying.
Terms of being yeah.
Because I do love the performance. I think the performance is great, but I don't think the characterization is as menacing as the performance is, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
When you strip away Michelle Gomez and you just think about what she's done as the Master, I don't think there's enough menace in her actions compared to her performance, if that makes sense. And that's why I thought that when she first appeared and did, in her first real story, she did something reprehensible like cause the death of Danny Pink, I feel like that would have been a much greater action for this to all come to effect. But because obviously instead what they go for is more the theme around the Doctor being a commander of soldiers, they have her give him an army. It fits into that, but in terms of her character arc as a whole from Series 8 to 10, I think it would have been more effective in hindsight, knowing that he's going to go in that direction, if she had actually done something that was as menacing as the performance lets on.
I think that's one of the great shames, though, about a lot of the various points of the Capaldi era where, a lot of this, as we're saying, we have to say in hindsight because there were so many things going on behind the scenes, like the whole Jenna Coleman staying on or not, and Moffat not knowing whether he was doing Series 10 or not. And it does make you wonder, doesn't it, if all this had been known in advance, it's the big what if, isn't it? Also, would Missy's act...
It's also Matt Smith deciding to leave at the last minute as well had a big impact. Because the time of the Doctor was an idea that Moffat had for an entire series, and he had to squash it into one episode and then think of something completely different for Capaldi.
which I'd argue produced some of his best work for series, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But they say necessity breeds invention or whatever. Like that, the tight corner he was squashed into. It goes one of two ways: you either produce something awful or something great. And then some people think Series 8's awful, and that's fair enough. But yeah, I just think under that pressure, I think Moffat delivered some of his most creative and strong ideas and concepts during Capaldi's time. I think absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we've pretty much gone through all the big points of Series 8 because that's the main one to talk about. Because I know it's your favorite of Modern Who, right?
It is my favorite, and we obviously I could go into even more detail as to why, but we've rambled enough. But I think just to summarize, I guess for anyone curious, Series 8 is my favorite because I do admit I think part of that is, like I said near the beginning, you know, the whole time of life I was at when it was airing. Being a first year uni student, I connected with it on many levels. I think a lot of people older or younger than me maybe didn't. The sort of relative realness of it, the amount of relatability, the stakes, the darker tone. It was just, I think it was everything I wanted from Doctor Who at that point in time, because I never really connected that much with the whimsicalness of the Matt Smith era. And I feel, especially towards the end, like with Time of the Doctor, it just peaked in that department. And I was like, I really wanted a big shift, and I got it with Series 8. And even watching it now as a standalone series, again, not saying you should ignore everything else, but when I watch Series 8 on its own, for me at least, it just really works like as a series on the whole. There are problems, like we've mentioned, but there's problems with every series of Doctor Who, even your favourites. So, but yeah, it's just, to me at least, it feels like one of the most cohesive series the show's ever produced for me, in terms of characterisation, journeys, etc. And yeah, I just love it. I could have just said that. I just love it. But yeah, I hope that's just like a summary reason as to why it's my favourite.
Well, funnily, what you're saying before about these problems with every series, like even all a bit like the Lazarus CGI looks terrible.
Oh man, oh boy. I mean, all that some of the RTD era CGI. Well, even now, you know, I mean, it's just Doctor Who sadly doesn't have the biggest budget. I think that's the be all and end all of it. But yeah, that Lazarus CGI is It's quite something, isn't it? So
it looks worse than a lot of classic Who effects, to be honest.
No, well, that's the problem with CGI, isn't it? It arguably ages a lot faster and worse than practical effects do.
Earlier today, I was looking at a picture of the Destroyer from Battlefield. That looks amazing. Like the prosthetics on that looks absolutely incredible, and then you get this big scorpion thing from 2007. It looks like something from a PlayStation 1 game.
I mean, imagine if they'd have done it practically. That would have been very cool, but also probably very, very expensive and way out of the BBC's. But then, having said that, they did the Ragnos, so it's like
that,
yeah. So maybe they could. Oh, I don't know.
I think the Lazarus experiment, not necessarily character-wise. I don't think the character work would be as tight. But just purely on an aesthetic level, it's an episode that would really work now in the Chibnall era with the current technology we have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hear that, Chibs? We want a remake or a sequel.
Yeah.
Get Mark Gatiss back in. He'll do anything. So, yeah.
Yes.
Give him something.
Series 9.